Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been sitting on this experience for years now, trying to make sense of it. This happened back in summer 2007 when I was visiting my aunt at her cabin in Willitz, California. I was 42 at the time, and my aunt was 63, still spry as hell and always up for an adventure, which is probably where I get it from. I'd arrived at her place a day earlier, and you know how it is when you've been cooped up in the city too long. First thing I wanted to do was explore the surrounding forest. My aunt's cabin was pretty isolated, backed right up to miles of dense woodland. It was beautiful country, tall pines, lots of undergrowth, that earthy forest smell that you just can't find anywhere else. That first afternoon, I'd gone out exploring by myself and found this old, overgrown logging road that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. It was fascinating, nature slowly reclaiming what humans had abandoned. The pavement was cracked with weeds growing through, tree branches reaching across what used to be a clear path. I only walked about a mile down it before the sun started getting low, but I noticed what looked like an old refuse pit off to one side. Now, I've always had this thing for antique bottles and glass. My aunt collected them too. Had shelves of blue and green glass bottles she'd found over the years. When I got back to the cabin, I told her about the old dump site and suggested we check it out together the next day. Might find some treasures, I said. She was totally game. So the next morning after breakfast, we packed some water and snacks in my backpack and headed out. It was a warm day, but not too hot yet, maybe upper 70s. The forest was thick enough that we got plenty of shade as we walked. We chatted about family stuff, catching up on cousins and whatnot. It was nice, you know, just a normal day out with my aunt. We found the logging road easily enough, and I led the way down it. The whole time I kept pointing out interesting plants or birds to my aunt. She knew way more about local wildlife than I did, so she'd tell me what they were called. It was relaxed, pleasant, nothing felt off yet. We'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes when everything changed. I still remember exactly where we were, on a part of the road that curved slightly to the right, with a slope rising up on the left side. The trees were especially dense there, creating these pockets of shadow even in the daytime. That's when I saw it, about 90 feet away, up on that slope to our left. At first I thought it might be a bear. We'd seen signs of them earlier, some scat on the trail, a claw mark on a tree, but this was standing upright, and it was tall, way too tall. I stopped walking mid-sentence. My aunt nearly bumped into me from behind. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to process what I was looking at. The figure was just standing there, swaying slightly, like it was shifting its weight from foot to foot. It was positioned right in the shadows, cast by a cluster of tall pines, which made it hard to see clearly. But I could tell it was exceptionally large, much taller than any human I'd ever seen. It looked like it was wearing some kind of dark, rough clothing, but something about the texture seemed off. And it had this thick, mane-like hair that tapered down to its shoulders. I squinted, trying to make out details. The distance and shadows made it difficult, but I could feel it watching us. I don't know how else to explain it. I could feel its attention focused on us like a physical sensation. For several minutes we just stood there, me staring at it staring at us, my aunt oblivious to what I was seeing because of how I was positioned, blocking her view. Then it moved. Not suddenly, but deliberately. It took a step toward us, then another. Each movement was fluid, almost graceful for something so large. My heart started hammering in my chest. I wasn't panicking yet, but every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. I didn't want to frighten my aunt, though. She has a heart condition, and I was worried about triggering something if I told her what I was seeing. So I kept my voice calm, I don't know how, and said, "Aunt Marge, I think we should head back now." "What? Why?" she asked. "We haven't even found the dump site yet." "I just remembered there's something I need to get back for," I lied. "A work call. Let's come back tomorrow." She seemed disappointed but agreed. As we turned to leave, I positioned myself between her and the creature, keeping my body as a shield so she couldn't see it. I kept her engaged in conversation, asking about her garden, anything to keep her attention away from what was behind us. But I couldn't help myself. I had to look back. When I glanced over my shoulder, my blood went cold. It was following us, not charging, not running, just steadily walking about 25 feet behind. Its movement was the most unnerving thing. It moved with absolute silence. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves. It almost seemed to be gliding rather than walking, like its feet barely touched the ground. I picked up our pace slightly, still trying not to alarm my aunt. "Let's hurry a bit," I said. "I don't want to miss that call." The next time I looked back, it was gone. Just vanished. I scanned the forest frantically, wondering if it had circled around to cut us off, but I couldn't spot it anywhere. The sudden disappearance was almost more terrifying than seeing it follow us. We made it back to the cabin without further incident. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. Once we were safely inside, I locked it behind us and checked all the windows. "Walter, what on earth is going on with you?" my aunt finally demanded. I had to tell her. I sat her down at the kitchen table and explained what I'd seen. To her credit, she didn't dismiss me outright. She listened carefully, asked questions, then got up and pulled out a book from her shelf, a local guide to wildlife and folklore. "Was it like this?" she asked, showing me a page about black bears. "No," I said, "much larger and definitely bipedal." She flipped through more pages, then stopped on one with an artist's rendering of a Sasquatch. "Like this?" I studied the image. "Similar," I said, "but not exactly." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to remember every detail. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a sketch pad and drew what I'd seen as accurately as I could. It was only then, as I was drawing, that I realized what had been bothering me so much about its appearance. The head. It had a distinctly pointed head, almost conical in shape. It reminded me instantly of those old cone heads from the comedy sketches. But there was nothing comical about this thing. The shape was wrong, unnatural. No primate, no mammal I know of has a head shaped like that. When I showed my aunt the drawing, she went pale. She'd lived in those woods for over 20 years and had heard stories from locals, especially the Native American communities nearby. They had legends about forest beings that didn't quite match the popular image of Sasquatch or Bigfoot. The other thing that still haunts me was how shadowy it appeared. Even when it stepped out of the tree shadows, it seemed to carry darkness with it. There was no clear definition to its features, just this dark silhouette with that distinctive conical head and mane. It was as if it existed partially in some other dimension, not fully present in our reality. I stayed at my aunt's for 3 more days, and we didn't go back to that logging road. I kept feeling like we were being watched, though. At night, I'd hear movement outside the cabin, not animals, something larger, more deliberate. Once I thought I saw a tall shadow pass by the kitchen window, but when I rushed to look, nothing was there. My aunt called some friends who lived nearby, and they came over to stay with us for the remaining nights. She didn't tell them exactly what happened, just said she'd feel better having more people around. They probably thought it was because of her age or health, but I was grateful for their presence. Before I left to go back home, I spoke with a local ranger about what we'd encountered. Without saying exactly what I saw, I asked if there had been any unusual wildlife sightings in the area. He mentioned increased bear activity, but nothing out of the ordinary. When I pressed about any reports of Sasquatch or similar creatures, He gave me a strange look. "We get those stories from time to time," he said, "especially from the logging roads north of town. Most people who report them don't come back to those areas." That was over 16 years ago now. I've gone back to visit my aunt many times since then, but I've never returned to that logging road. My aunt still lives in that cabin, though she doesn't go exploring in the woods alone anymore. I've spent countless hours researching, trying to find similar encounters. There are plenty of Sasquatch stories from Northern California, but few mention the pointed head or that strange, shadowy quality. The ones that do share those details come from people who seem credible: forestry workers, hikers, people with nothing to gain from making up stories. The thing that still bothers me most is the silence. How could something that large move without making a sound? No footsteps, no breathing, nothing, and the way it seemed to disappear instantly, as if it had never been there at all. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't a bear, or a person in a costume, or any normal woodland creature. There was something intelligent in the way it observed us, something purposeful in how it followed us. Sometimes I wonder if it was curious rather than threatening. It could have easily caught up to us if it wanted to. Maybe we were as strange to it as it was to us. My aunt and I have a pact now. We don't talk about that day with other family members. They'd think we were losing it. But every time I visit, we'll sometimes catch each other looking out toward the tree line, especially as dusk falls. And I know we're both thinking about the same thing. What exactly is out there in those woods? And is it still watching? I still have the drawing I made. It's folded up in my wallet. Sometimes when I've had a few drinks and I'm feeling brave, I'll take it out and look at it, and every time that same cold feeling washes over me. Because whatever that thing was, it didn't belong in our world. And I can't shake the feeling that someday I'll look up and see that distinctive silhouette again, watching me from the shadows. Story 2. I've been debating whether to post this for a long time. 15 years have passed, but I still question what we saw that night. I'm a geologist by training, taught to observe and document precisely, not jump to conclusions. That's probably why this experience has haunted me so much, because I can't explain it away, no matter how hard I've tried. This happened back in 2008, when I landed a summer position at Yellowstone. I was pretty excited about it, working in one of the most geologically fascinating places in the country while making decent money. My colleague Matt, not his real name, and I were driving from Cody, Wyoming to the park. We'd decided to share the drive since we'd be working together anyway, and it made sense financially. We left Cody around 9:30 p.m. It was early June, and still not fully dark, that weird twilight where the sky holds onto a bit of deep blue. We were both wide awake, talking about the upcoming job and catching up since we hadn't seen each other since grad school the previous year. I was driving my old Subaru Outback, nothing fancy but reliable on mountain roads. The closer we got to the park, the darker it got. The highway cuts through some pretty remote areas, with thick forest on both sides. There weren't many other cars on the road, maybe past one vehicle every 15 minutes or so. We had the high beams on since there was no oncoming traffic, and I was being careful because this was prime wildlife territory. About 20 miles from the east entrance to Yellowstone, we were rounding one of those winding mountain curves. The road had a slight downhill grade, and there were drainage ditches on both sides about 3-4 feet deep. I remember checking the time, 11:17 p.m., because Matt had just asked how much longer till we reached our housing. That's when I saw it. My headlight swept across something emerging from the right side ditch about 200 feet ahead. At first, my brain registered bear because of the size and the shaggy dark outline, but within a split second, I realized whatever this was had stood up completely straight on 2 legs. "Holy shit," Matt said beside me, confirming I wasn't hallucinating. I immediately took my foot off the gas, not slamming the brakes yet, but definitely slowing down. The thing was now fully visible in our headlights, standing completely upright at the edge of the road. The first detail that seared into my memory were the eyes. They reflected yellow in our headlights, like a dog's or deer's eyes do, that tapetum lucidum effect that amplifies light. But these eyes were set in a face that was unmistakably not animal-like in the conventional sense, not a bear, definitely not a person in a costume. The creature first looked directly toward our approaching vehicle. Then it did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. It deliberately turned its head away from the light, but the way it moved was what struck us both immediately as wrong and non-human. Its entire upper body, shoulders, chest, and head, rotated as one unit in this fluid but mechanical way that no human moves. Our bodies don't work like that. By now I'd slowed to maybe 15 mph, and we were close enough to see this thing in disturbing detail. It was massive, I'm 6'1", and this creature towered over what I would stand at that distance. We later estimated 7 to 7.5 feet tall, conservatively. The body mass was incredible, probably 600 to 800 pounds, with broad shoulders that must have been twice the width of mine. Its posture wasn't hunched or awkward, like you'd expect from someone in a costume. It stood fully upright with this natural, balanced stance. The proportions were just off, human-like, but exaggerated and wrong in subtle ways that triggered some primal warning system in my brain. I'd slowed nearly to a stop about 50-60 feet from it when the creature began to move across the road. I'll never forget this. It took exactly 3 enormous strides to cross the entire width of the highway, which had to be at least 22 feet across. Each step covered a distance that would take me multiple steps to match. There was this fluid power in its movement, like a perfectly efficient machine. The arms were noticeably longer than a human's, hanging down almost to knee level. As it reached the other side of the road, it took several shorter steps down the far embankment. Then, and this detail has stayed with me with crystal clarity, it used one hand to grab something under the road, probably the edge of a culvert pipe, and swung its entire body under and out of sight. The whole encounter lasted maybe 15 to 20 seconds. We sat there in stunned silence for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Matt broke the silence first. "Did you just see what I think I saw?" His voice sounded strained, higher than normal. I couldn't even respond right away. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to back up and get the hell out of there, while another part wanted to get out and investigate. The scientist in me was battling with the lizard brain that was screaming danger. "Should we check it out?" Matt finally asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't eager to. "I don't know if that's smart," I replied, finally finding my voice. Whatever that was, it was fucking huge. We debated briefly about what to do. Ultimately, caution won out. I slowly accelerated past the spot where it had disappeared, both of us scanning the roadside ditches for any movement. We didn't see anything else. The rest of the drive to the park was tense. We kept the windows up despite the warm night, and I maintained a faster speed than was probably safe on those winding roads. We barely spoke, both processing what we'd witnessed. When we reached the east entrance around midnight, we tried to report what we'd seen to a ranger, but the station was minimally staffed that late. The only person there was a young seasonal employee who seemed skeptical when we mentioned a large unidentified animal on the road. He took down our information and said someone would follow up, but his expression made it clear he thought we were either joking or had seen a bear. We didn't explicitly say Sasquatch or Bigfoot. As scientists, we were reluctant to jump to that conclusion, even though that's exactly what had crossed both our minds. Instead, we described it as an unidentified bipedal creature that didn't match any known wildlife. We reached our seasonal housing around 1 a.m. Neither of us slept well. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, questioning what I'd seen, wondering if my mind had somehow distorted an ordinary animal into something extraordinary. But every time I walked through the memory, the details remained consistent and impossible to rationalize away. The next morning, without telling each other, we both independently wrote down detailed descriptions of what we'd witnessed. It was a method we'd been taught in our geology fieldwork. Document observations immediately to prevent memory corruption. When we compared notes over breakfast, the similarities were uncanny. We'd both noted the same specific details. The way it moved its upper body as one unit, which leg it moved first when crossing the road, right. The approximate height, the arm length, the color, dark brown to black. Even the way it used its hand to swing under the road. The creature had a blocky, yet somehow elongated head, slightly domed at the top. Its neck was thick but short, almost like it didn't have much of a neck at all. The head just sat on these immensely broad shoulders. The chest was full and deep, and the torso seemed longer in proportion than a human's. What continues to stand out was how the proportions were just wrong. Not dramatically wrong like in a badly done costume, but subtly wrong in a way that's actually more disturbing. Like looking at a human body where everything is shifted just enough to trigger that uncanny valley feeling. Its arms were notably longer than ours, reaching down to around knee level. The hands were large with long fingers, not claws, but definitely covered in the same dark hair as the rest of the body. There was a bulk to the body that suggested massive muscle, not fat. The legs were thick and powerful, explaining how it could cover so much ground in so few strides. The hair or fur covered its entire body from what we could see, a uniform dark brown that looked almost black in our headlights. It wasn't shaggy like a costume, more like a thick, dense covering that followed the contours of the body. What really struck me was the creature's reaction to us. It didn't seem afraid exactly, more cautious. It moved with purpose, not panic, like it knew exactly what to do when spotted, get across the road and out of sight as efficiently as possible. There was intelligence in those movements. We reported the sighting more officially that day to the senior park rangers. They took our report professionally enough, but I could tell they didn't really believe us. One older ranger did mention that there had been unusual wildlife reports in that area before, but he was vague about details. They promised to send someone to check the location, but we never heard anything back. Throughout that summer, Matt and I would occasionally bring it up when we were alone, comparing notes again, questioning ourselves. We researched local wildlife extensively, trying to find any known animal that could possibly match what we'd seen. Nothing fit. A grizzly on its hind legs couldn't move the way this creature did. A moose was too spindly. A person in a costume couldn't have covered that ground in 3 strides or moved with that fluid power. I've never been a believer in cryptids or paranormal stuff. I'm a scientist, trained to be skeptical. But that night shook my worldview in a way nothing else has. I don't know what we saw. I can't explain it, but I know what we both documented independently and in detail. The most rational explanation is that it was some kind of undocumented primate. The least rational is that we both simultaneously hallucinated the exact same thing down to minute details. Neither seems satisfying. I've kept this experience mostly to myself for years, telling only my wife and a couple close friends. Matt and I still touch base occasionally, and neither of us has changed our account over time. If anything, the clarity of that memory has only solidified. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. I'm not sure I would believe it if someone else told it to me. But I know what I saw that night outside Yellowstone, and 15 years later, I still can't explain it. That massive figure moving with that unnatural fluidity across the highway, then disappearing into the darkness. It fundamentally changed how I understand the world and what might exist in the remote corners of it. All I know is that I won't be driving that road at night again. And whenever I'm hiking in remote wilderness now, I occasionally glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a pair of yellow eyes reflecting back at me from the trees. Story 3. The first time was back in the early 90s. I was bear hunting in Baraga Swamp. Locals know it as some of the densest, most isolated woodland in the UP. I'd set up my bait barrel about a week before season opened, checking it every couple days to make sure something was taking interest. That particular morning, I'd hiked in before dawn and climbed up to my tree stand about 20 feet up an old maple with a good view of the clearing where I'd placed the barrel. It was one of those perfect fall mornings, crisp air, just enough chill to keep the mosquitoes down, and dead quiet except for the occasional chickadee or nuthatch. I'd been sitting there maybe 3 hours just watching when the woods suddenly went completely silent. Not just quiet, I mean absolutely nothing making a sound. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Every hunter knows that silence usually means something big is moving through. I gripped my .30-06 a little tighter and scanned the edges of the clearing. That's when I noticed movement about 60 yards to my left. At first, I thought it was a bear, but the movement was different. Whatever it was seemed to be crawling from one tree to another, staying low and using the undergrowth for cover. I only caught glimpses, a dark shape moving deliberately, carefully. Then it stood up. I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing had to be over 7 feet tall. The hair on my neck stood straight up. It was covered in dark brown or black hair, and even from that distance I could tell it was massive, way bigger than any black bear in Michigan. My first thought was, what the hell is a grizzly doing this far east? But this wasn't a grizzly. The proportions were all wrong. I slowly raised my rifle, not to shoot, but to use the scope for a better look. That's when I heard it, a growl so deep and powerful it seemed to vibrate the air around me. It wasn't coming from the direction I was looking. It was coming from behind me. I've never felt fear like that before. The growl wasn't just loud. I could literally feel it in my chest cavity. My hands started shaking so bad I nearly dropped my rifle. Very slowly, I lowered the gun back to my lap. Whatever had made that sound was telling me in no uncertain terms not to point my weapon at what I was seeing. I sat completely frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably just one. I didn't dare move, didn't dare look behind me. Eventually, the creature I'd been watching seemed to melt back into the forest. Only then did I feel like it might be safe to climb down. As I reached the bottom of my stand, I caught movement at the edge of my vision, a dark mass standing in the shadows about 40 yards away, just watching me. I couldn't make out features, just a large, dark silhouette. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my pack and started walking, not running, just walking steadily, in the direction of my truck, which was about 2 miles away. The whole way back I knew I was being followed, not just by one thing, but several. They stayed just out of sight, but I could hear them moving through the brush parallel to the trail. Occasionally, something would hit a tree near me or land on the trail behind me, sticks and small rocks. It felt like they were herding me, making sure I kept moving away from their territory. By the time I reached my truck, I was drenched in sweat despite the cool temperature. I threw my gear in the back and got the hell out of there. I didn't go bear hunting again that season, or the next. In fact, I stayed away from Baraga Swamp completely for years after that. I told myself a lot of things over the years to explain what happened. Maybe it was just other hunters playing tricks. Maybe I'd seen a moose, though they don't grow hair like what I saw. Maybe the stress of hunting alone had gotten to me. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I just didn't want to admit it. Fast forward to January 2024, over 30 years later, and I'm still hunting, though these days I mostly stick to deer and small game. A friend who lives near Yale in the Thumb region of Michigan had been having problems with coyotes killing his livestock. He asked if I'd come help thin them out, and I agreed. Coyote hunting in winter is different. You do it at night, using calls to bring them in. I've upgraded my equipment over the years. That night, I was using my AR-10 .308 caliber with a high-end thermal scope. It was a cold, clear night with about 3 inches of snow on the ground. Perfect conditions for predator hunting. I'd set up at the edge of a large field, backing up to a wooded area with a drainage ditch running through it. There's a small bridge where the farm access road crosses the ditch, and I was positioned about 100 yards from it with a clear view of the field. Around midnight, I started seeing activity. The thermal scope showed me several coyotes moving along the tree line about 300 yards out. I also picked up a few deer bedded down in the far corner of the field. Everything was going as expected until around 1:30 a.m., when suddenly all the wildlife started acting strange. The coyotes, which had been moving closer to my position, suddenly turned and ran, all of them at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The deer in the corner got up and bolted in the opposite direction. Something had spooked everything, and it wasn't me. I hadn't moved or made any noise. I scanned slowly with the thermal, looking for whatever had caused the reaction. At first, I thought I was looking at a large dog moving along the drainage ditch, coming from the direction of the bridge. But as I watched it move, something seemed off about the way it was walking. It had an awkward, lurching gait, almost like it was injured or walking on unfamiliar terrain. Then it stood up. I nearly pissed myself. Through the thermal, I could clearly see it rise from all fours to a bipedal stance. Even at about 225 yards, I could tell this thing was big, probably close to 7 feet tall. The thermal showed a heat signature unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not quite human, not quite animal. The proportions were all wrong. Long arms, relatively short but powerful-looking legs, and what appeared to be a somewhat canine-shaped head on a thick, almost non-existent neck. The closest thing I can compare it to is a smaller version of Anubis from those Egyptian pictures, that dog-headed god. But this wasn't some statue or costume. This was a living, breathing thing looking directly at my position. I don't know what came over me, but training and instinct kicked in. I flipped the safety off and fired. The first shot appeared to miss or have no effect because the thing didn't even flinch. I fired again and again, working the trigger as fast as I could while trying to keep the sight on target. I think I got off 5 or 6 rounds before one finally seemed to hit home in what I'd guess was its lower body or hip area. The creature dropped back to all fours and turned, moving with surprising speed back toward the drainage ditch. I lost sight of it as it disappeared below the bank. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't have made another shot if I'd tried. I sat there for maybe another hour, scanning constantly with the thermal, but saw nothing else moving in the field. I wasn't about to go looking for whatever it was in the dark, so I waited until first light before approaching the area where I'd seen it go down to the ditch. What I found there has been keeping me up at night ever since. The snow and mud along the bank showed clear tracks, 4 distinct marks where it had been moving on all fours, then transitioning to 2 deep footprints. These weren't human footprints. They were at least 15 inches long, with what looked like 5 toes, but wider, and with what appeared to be claw marks at the end of each toe. The stride between them was enormous, easily 4 feet or more. The tracks led right to the water's edge and disappeared. The ditch had about 2 feet of water in it, and there were no tracks coming out on either side that I could find. Whatever I'd shot at had either gone into the water and travelled down the ditch or, I don't know. I searched for blood, but found none, which surprised me considering I was sure I'd hit it. I've been back to hunt deer in that area since then, but only during daylight hours. I've given up coyote hunting altogether. Something about being out there in the dark now feels like I'm inviting another encounter, and I don't think I could handle a third one. I've spent my whole life in these Michigan woods. I know every animal that's supposed to be here. What I saw both times wasn't one of them. I've listened to stories from other hunters over the years. Strange encounters they couldn't explain, weird noises in the night, feelings of being watched. I used to think they were just campfire tales or the result of too much whiskey. Not anymore. Whatever's out there in the swamps and forests, it's been there a lot longer than us. And from what I experienced, it knows exactly what we are and what we're capable of. That first encounter in Baraga, they could have easily taken me out if they'd wanted to. Instead, they just escorted me off their territory. The second encounter near Yale feels different, though. Like maybe I stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. I still have the AR-10 I used that night. Sometimes I look at it and wonder if I actually hit something or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I remember those tracks in the mud, transitioning from 4 prints to 2, and I know what I saw was real. I just don't know what to call it. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or anything supernatural. I'm just a regular guy who likes fishing and hanging out with friends. But what happened that day in August has completely messed with my head, and I still can't explain it. It was August 14th, a day I'll never forget. I'd planned to spend the afternoon fishing at Emerald Lake near the Pinewood Mall outside Greensburg. It's normally a peaceful spot where I can just zone out and enjoy some alone time. The weather was perfect that day, not too hot, with a slight breeze that kept the bugs away. I arrived at the lake around 12:30 and set up my gear near my usual spot on the eastern shore. There weren't many people around, which was exactly how I liked it. Just me, my thoughts, and hopefully a few good catches to make the day worthwhile. About half an hour in, I started getting this weird feeling. You know that sensation when you think someone's watching you, that prickle on the back of your neck. Yeah, that. I tried to ignore it at first, figuring it was just my imagination or maybe someone walking by on one of the trails. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I remember setting down my fishing rod and looking around, scanning the tree line that bordered the lake. That's when I noticed something strange in the woods about 100 yards away. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, or maybe a large fallen tree trunk I hadn't noticed before. But then it moved. My heart literally skipped a beat. What I was looking at was definitely not a person, at least not any normal person. Through gaps in the trees, I could make out a large, dark figure moving slowly between the trunks. The way it moved was wrong. It wasn't like watching someone hike through the woods. This thing was tall, way taller than any person I've ever seen, and it moved with this strange, fluid motion that seemed both awkward and incredibly efficient at the same time. I remember fumbling for my phone, wanting to take a picture or video, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even unlock the screen. By the time I looked back up, the figure had moved deeper into the woods, and I could only catch glimpses as it passed between trees. What happened next is still hard for me to process. Instead of doing the smart thing and getting the hell out of there, my curiosity got the better of me. I left my fishing gear, something I'd never normally do, that stuff was expensive, and started moving toward the tree line, staying low and trying to be quiet. As I got closer to the woods, a smell hit me that nearly made me gag. It was like a mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else I can't even describe, musty and wild and just wrong. I've smelled dead animals in the woods before, but this was different. It wasn't just death. It was something alive that smelled like it shouldn't exist. I paused at the edge of the trees, suddenly realizing how stupid I was being. I was about to turn back when I saw it clearly for the first time. About 50 yards away, moving between 2 large oak trees, was what I can only describe as an enormous hair-covered creature. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the shadows of the trees. It was walking upright on 2 legs, but hunched over, with incredibly long arms that hung down past its knees. I froze. Completely froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think. The creature stopped too, as if sensing my presence, though it didn't turn around. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, we both just stood there, motionless. Then it made this sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt, but something in between, low and rumbly, like it was coming from deep inside its chest. That sound broke whatever spell had me frozen in place. I started backing up, slowly at first, then faster, desperate to get back to open space. I must have stepped on a branch or something because there was a loud snap under my foot. The creature's head whipped around so fast it seemed impossible for something that size. Its face, God, its face. I only saw it for a split second, but it's burned into my memory. It wasn't like a gorilla or an ape exactly. The face was flatter, with a prominent brow and a wide, almost human-like mouth. But the eyes, they were what got me. They weren't animal eyes. They were aware, intelligent. They locked onto mine for just a moment, and I felt something I can't explain, like it wasn't just seeing me, but knowing me. Then everything happened at once. The creature dropped to all fours, with shocking speed and agility. I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life, not even looking back to see if it was following me. I just knew I needed to get out of those woods. I burst out of the tree line, sprinting across the open area back to my fishing spot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my gear, but there was no way I was leaving it behind now. I needed to act normal, to not draw attention. If I left everything and ran, it would know I was afraid. Don't ask me how I knew that, I just did. As I hurriedly packed up my stuff, I kept glancing back at the woods, half expecting to see that thing emerge from the trees. But there was nothing, just the still, seemingly peaceful forest that now felt like it was hiding something impossible. I practically ran to my car, threw my gear in the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat for a good 5 minutes, just trying to stop shaking enough to drive. I kept the doors locked and windows up, even though it was getting hot inside the car. No way was I letting any air in that might carry that smell again. I was torn about what to do next. Part of me wanted to pretend it never happened, to drive home and try to convince myself I'd seen a bear or some other normal animal, but I knew what I saw wasn't normal, and if it was real, people needed to know about it. So I called my buddy Philip. We've been friends since high school, and he's one of the few people who wouldn't immediately think I was crazy or drunk. I told him to meet me near the old railroad tracks that run behind the Pinewood Mall. I don't know why I picked that spot. Maybe because it was open enough that I'd feel safe, but close enough to where I saw the thing that we could maybe spot it again. Looking back, that was such a stupid idea, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Philip showed up about 20 minutes later. I could tell from his face that he thought I was pulling his leg at first. He kept smirking as I told him what I'd seen. But that smile faded when he realized how badly I was still shaking. "Dude, you're serious about this, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded. "I know how it sounds, I know. But Phil, I swear to God, what I saw wasn't human and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen before." We decided to walk along the railroad tracks a bit, staying in open areas where we could see all around us. I kept telling myself we were safe in daylight, in the open, with two of us together. But my stomach was in knots the whole time. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes, with me constantly glancing toward the woods that ran alongside the tracks, when we heard it. A rustling sound, like something large moving through dense brush. We both stopped dead in our tracks. "Probably just a deer," Philip whispered, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The rustling got louder, and we could see the tops of some bushes moving about 50 yards ahead of us, near where the tracks curved and the woods came closer to the rail line. "Let's head back," I said, my mouth gone completely dry. "Wait," Philip grabbed my arm, pointing. "Look." That's when it happened again. The creature, the exact same one I'd seen at the lake, I'm certain of it, burst out of the brush and loped across the railroad tracks right in front of us. Its movements were so fluid, yet so unnatural. It ran hunched over, those impossibly long arms swinging at its sides. The matted dark hair covering its body seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. "Holy shit," Philip whispered, his grip on my arm tightening so much it hurt. Holy fucking shit. The smell hit us a moment later, that same putrid, wild stench that made my eyes water. The creature never looked our way, seemingly focused on whatever destination it had in mind. After crossing the tracks, it dropped to all fours for a few strides before disappearing into the woods on the other side. We stood frozen for several long seconds before Philip broke the silence. "Tell me that wasn't what I think it was." I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what we'd both just seen, but there was no rational explanation. That thing was real, and it was exactly what the stories described, what people laughed about around campfires or dismissed as rural legends. "We need to tell someone," I finally said. "This isn't just in my head, you saw it too." Philip nodded, still staring at the spot where the creature had vanished into the trees. "Who's going to believe us? They'll think we're drunk or high or just making it up." He had a point. 2 guys in their early 20s claiming to have seen Bigfoot. We'd be laughed out of town, but I remembered hearing about a local fire chief who was interested in these kinds of sightings. Edward Hutchinson. He had a team with bloodhounds that they used for search and rescue. If anyone might take us seriously, it would be him. We decided to head straight to the fire station. On the way there, Philip mentioned hearing about a police officer who'd reported seeing something strange in the woods early that same morning. Glowing eyes attached to a tall figure. I hadn't heard about it, but the coincidence made my skin crawl. This thing had been active all day, moving around our area. Chief Hutchinson was skeptical at first, as we expected, but something in our expressions, or the way we described what we'd seen, must have convinced him we weren't making it up. He told us he'd bring his bloodhound team out that evening to check the area. "Don't get your hopes up," he warned us. "Even if there is something out there, these woods are extensive. Finding anything specific is a long shot." We gave him the exact locations where we'd seen the creature, and he promised to call us if they found anything. Philip and I spent the rest of the afternoon at his place, repeatedly going over what we'd seen, almost like we were trying to convince ourselves it had really happened. Around 8 p.m. my phone rang. It was Chief Hutchinson, but not with news about our sighting. His team had been redirected to search for a young boy who'd gone missing in the woods near his home. Apparently, the kid had heard the local rumors about a Bigfoot in the area and had gone looking for it on his own. "Is he okay?" I asked, immediately thinking about that creature and what it might do if it encountered a child. "We don't know yet," Hutchinson replied, the stress evident in his voice, "but we're pulling everyone to find him before nightfall." I offered to help with the search, and so did Philip. We ended up joining a group of volunteers combing through a section of woods about a mile from where we'd seen the creature. The whole time I was on edge, jumping at every sound, constantly scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Thankfully, they found the boy around 10 p.m. He was scared but unharmed, having gotten turned around in the woods as darkness fell. He claimed he'd heard strange noises and had hidden in a hollow log until rescuers found him. By the time everyone cleared out, it was too late for Chief Hutchinson to investigate our sighting. He promised to check it out the next day, but by then the trail would be cold. I had a feeling the creature would be long gone anyway. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, those intelligent eyes looking into mine. I kept replaying the encounters over and over, trying to find some detail that would prove it was just a bear or some other known animal. But there was nothing. What we saw was real, and it was not something that's supposed to exist. In the days that followed, a few other reports trickled in from around Westmoreland County. Nothing as clear as what we'd seen, just vague sightings of a large figure in the woods, strange noises at night, livestock acting nervous. Chief Hutchinson did take his dogs out to the railroad tracks where we'd seen the creature cross, but too much time had passed, and they couldn't pick up any unusual scent. It's been weeks now, and I still don't know what to make of what happened. I've researched similar sightings online, and some of the descriptions match exactly what we saw. but I never believed in any of that stuff before. I was the guy who laughed at Bigfoot hunters and their blurry photos. Not anymore. I know what I saw. Philip knows what he saw. And somewhere out there, that creature is still moving through the woods, watching, aware. I haven't been back to Emerald Lake since. I sold my fishing gear. I don't even like driving past wooded areas anymore, especially as dusk approaches. Sometimes at night, I wake up suddenly, convinced I can smell that distinctive odor in my room, that putrid, wild smell that doesn't belong in our world. And sometimes, in that space between sleeping and waking, I swear I can feel those eyes watching me again, intelligent and ancient and knowing, watching and waiting for... what? I don't know, but I hope I never find out. Story 5. I've been going back and forth about whether to post this for months now. Part of me just wants to forget everything that happened, but I can't sleep most nights without replaying it all in my head. Maybe writing it down will help. I don't care if anyone believes me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. It happened last August 16th. I still remember the date because it was my mum's birthday, and I'd promised to drive over to her place for dinner after finishing up some work at my buddy's farm out in Willow Creek Township. For those who don't know the area, it's mostly farmland, with patches of dense forest scattered throughout, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing interesting ever happens. Or at least, that's what I thought. I'd stayed at Jeff's place longer than planned, helping him fix his tractor, and by the time I left, dusk was setting in. I wasn't worried, though. I'd driven those back roads 1,000,000 times before. The sunset that evening was particularly beautiful, casting this golden-orange glow across the fields. I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked. I was taking County Road 16, which cuts through some of the most isolated parts of the township. There's this stretch where you don't see a house for miles, just open fields on one side and a line of trees marking the edge of the forest on the other. I had my windows down, enjoying the cool evening breeze, radio playing quietly. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get them occasionally in the area, though it's rare to see one out in the open like that. It was in Hargrove's field, maybe 50 yards from the road, hunched over in the tall grass. But something about it seemed off. Even from that distance, I could tell it was massive, way bigger than any black bear I'd ever seen, and the shape was wrong. Bears don't have that kind of posture. I slowed my truck down, curiosity getting the better of me. The sun was setting behind me, casting these long shadows across the field, which made it hard to make out details. But I could see that whatever this thing was, it was eating something. It was tearing at the ground, pulling up what looked like chunks of earth, or maybe roots. I couldn't tell for sure. I pulled over, killing the engine but leaving my lights on. In retrospect, that was probably not the smartest move, but at the time, I just wanted a better look. I grabbed the binoculars I keep in my glove compartment for hunting season and stepped out of my truck. The moment my door shut, not slammed, just a normal close, the thing stopped moving. It was like it froze completely. Then, slowly, it raised its head and seemed to look directly at me. I'll never forget what I saw through those binoculars. It wasn't a bear. Not even close. The creature was covered in thick, dark hair, not fur like a bear, but longer, almost like a human with a serious hormone problem. It was sitting on its haunches, but even seated I could tell it was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet if it stood upright. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and its arms were proportionally too long for its body. But what really got me were its eyes. They caught the dying sunlight and seemed to glow with this yellowish reflection, like a cat's eyes in a flashlight beam. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I couldn't move. It was like my brain just short-circuited trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't any animal I recognized, but it sure as hell wasn't human either. Then it stood up. Jesus Christ, when that thing rose to its full height, I felt my heart stop. It was enormous. easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. And the way it moved, it was fluid, deliberate, not lumbering like a bear. The entire outline of its body was visible against the darkening sky, and I could make out this massive barrel-shaped chest and thick limbs. It took one step toward me, and that broke my trance. I dove back into my truck so fast I banged my knee on the steering wheel. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The whole time, I kept my eyes on that thing, expecting it to charge at any moment. But it didn't. It just stood there, watching me. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, it turned and loped toward the tree line at the far end of the field. It didn't run like a person, or even like a bear. It had this weird, swinging gait that ate up ground faster than anything I'd ever seen. It disappeared into the forest before I could even get my truck started. I sat there for a minute, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I'd just seen a bear in bad lighting. But I knew better. I've hunted these woods my whole life. I know what bears look like, how they move. This was something else entirely. Eventually, curiosity overcame fear, and I grabbed my flashlight from under the seat. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to just drive away, but I had to see where it had been. I needed some kind of proof, even if just for myself. I left my truck running with the headlights on and walked about 20 yards into the field, following the path where I'd seen the creature. The grass was tall, coming up to my knees in places, but there was a clear trail where something large had moved through it. When I reached the spot where it had been sitting, I found this large depression in the grass, maybe 6 feet in diameter. The ground inside the circle was torn up, with clumps of earth pulled out and scattered around. It looked like something had been digging, but not with tools. The marks were irregular, more like something had been ripping at the soil with powerful hands or claws. There was something else, too, something that made my blood run cold. At the center of the depression was a half-eaten something. It took me a moment to recognize it as the remains of a groundhog. The poor creature had been literally torn in half, its insides partially consumed. What struck me wasn't just the gruesomeness of it, but the fact that whatever killed it hadn't used claws or teeth in the way a predator normally would. It looked like it had been pulled apart by hand. I was backing away from this grisly scene when my flashlight beam caught something else. There, at the edge of the depression, was a footprint. Not a paw print like you'd expect from a bear or cougar, but a footprint, like a human's, but massive. It had to be at least 16 inches long and incredibly wide, with what looked like 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, too, suggesting whatever left it was extremely heavy. That's when I heard the snap of branches from the direction of the forest where the creature had disappeared. It wasn't close, but in the stillness of the evening, it carried clearly across the field. I didn't wait around to see what made the noise. I bolted back to my truck, jumped in, and got the hell out of there. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. How could I? I'd sound like a lunatic. I called my mom and made up some excuse about feeling sick and needing to reschedule dinner. I drove straight home, locked all my doors and windows, and spent the night with my shotgun across my lap, jumping at every sound. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated it in my mind. The light plays tricks at dusk, and maybe it was just a bear after all. I decided to keep it to myself and try to forget about it. But then, 3 days later, everything changed. I was at the local diner having breakfast when I overheard a group of guys at the next table talking in hushed, excited tones. One of them, Bill Hatcher, who works security at the Riverdale manufacturing plant on the edge of town, was telling the others about something that had happened during his shift the previous night. According to Bill, he and another guard had been making their rounds outside the facility when they spotted what they described as a giant hairy man moving along the fence line. At first, they thought it was a trespasser, maybe someone trying to break in. They shouted at it to stop and identify itself. That's when the thing turned toward them, and in the security lights they got a clear look at it. Bill said it stood at least 8 feet tall, was covered in dark brown hair, and had a face that was not quite human, not quite animal. When they raised their flashlights, the creature let out this deep guttural sound, not quite a growl, not quite a yell, and then took off toward the woods behind the plant at incredible speed. The guards called the sheriff's department and Deputy Miller responded. By this time, a small crowd had gathered. Other workers from the night shift and a couple of locals who'd heard the commotion. They formed an impromptu search party and followed the creature's tracks into the woods. What they found there made my encounter seem tame by comparison. The footprints were the same as what I'd seen. Massive, human-like impressions that sank deep into the soft forest floor. But that wasn't the shocking part. As they followed the trail deeper into the woods, they began to find trees that had been damaged. Not just broken branches, but entire trees uprooted or snapped off at the trunk. One of the guys at the diner, Tom Wilson, had been part of the search party. He described seeing a path of destruction like a tornado had cut through the forest, except it followed a straight line exactly where the footprints led. Young pine trees had been ripped completely out of the ground, roots and all. Larger trees had huge chunks of bark torn off, as if something had grabbed them while running past. I sat there, coffee growing cold, listening to them describe exactly the kind of creature I'd seen. The same massive size, the same dark hair, the same incredible speed. I felt sick to my stomach, a mixture of validation and terror washing over me. I decided right then that I needed to see this destruction for myself. After the guys left the diner, I paid my bill and drove straight to the woods behind the Riverdale plant. I told myself I was just curious, but the truth is, I needed proof. I needed to know I wasn't going crazy. The area was easy to find. There was yellow caution tape at the edge of the forest where the search party had entered. I slipped past it and followed the obvious trail they'd left. About a quarter-mile in, I started seeing the damage they'd described. It was worse than I'd imagined. The destruction wasn't random or weather-related. It followed a clear path in a straight line through the woods. Small trees lay on their sides, completely pulled from the ground with their root systems exposed. Larger trees that couldn't be uprooted had deep gouges in their trunks where something had clearly grabbed them. I followed the path of destruction for maybe half a mile until I came to the most disturbing sight of all. There stood, or rather lay, a white pine tree that I estimated to be at least 6.5 feet tall. It had been completely uprooted and tossed aside like it weighed nothing. The bark along one side was stripped away and several branches had been broken off. As I examined the tree, a voice behind me nearly made me jump out of my skin. Impressive, isn't it? I spun around to find Barry Clark standing there. Barry's been the game warden in these parts for over 20 years. He knows these woods better than anyone. 5 men couldn't have done this, he said, nodding toward the uprooted pine. Not without equipment, and look at this. He pointed to the exposed roots. These weren't cut, they were torn. Whatever pulled this tree out did it with brute force alone. I noticed he had a camera around his neck and a measuring tape in his hand. He'd been documenting the scene. You think it was a storm? I asked, trying to sound casual. Barry gave me a long look. Do you? I didn't answer. He didn't press. Found tracks too, he said after a moment, leading me a few yards away. There, in a patch of soft earth, was another one of those massive footprints. Barry had placed a ruler next to it for scale. The print measured 17 inches long and 8 inches across at the widest point. No bear made this, he said quietly, and there's no tractor tracks anywhere nearby. Whatever did this walked in, tore up these trees, and walked out. We stood there in silence for a minute. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since the diner. What do you think it was, Barry? He took a deep breath and looked around before answering. In 23 years as game warden, I've tracked every animal in these woods. I've never seen anything leave tracks like these, or have the strength to do this kind of damage." He paused. "People around here have been telling stories about something in these woods for generations. Most times, I write it off as imagination or misidentified bears. But this," he gestured at the destruction around us, "this makes me wonder." I almost told him then about what I'd seen in the field 3 days earlier. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear of not being believed, or maybe it was something more primal, as if speaking about the creature out loud might somehow summon it. We walked back toward the edge of the forest together. Barry told me the sheriff had declared the area off-limits pending an investigation, though he didn't sound optimistic they'd find anything conclusive. As we reached the caution tape, he turned to me. "Whatever you're doing in these woods alone, I'd reconsider it," he said. "At least until we figure out what we're dealing with." I nodded and thanked him, then got in my truck and drove home. That was over 2 months ago, and they still haven't figured out what we're dealing with. The official line is that it was probably vandals or teenagers messing around, maybe with help from some farm equipment. Nobody can explain the footprints or why anyone would go to such elaborate lengths to create a hoax. As for me, I know what I saw. I know it wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a costume, wasn't my imagination. There's something out there in the woods around Willow Creek, something big, something strong, something that's managed to stay hidden despite all our modern technology and knowledge. I don't go out to Jeff's farm anymore. I don't drive those back roads after dark. And I've sold my hunting equipment. I have no desire to be alone in those woods ever again. Sometimes at night, I think I hear heavy footsteps outside my house, but I never work up the courage to look out the window. Maybe it's just my imagination now, my brain processing the trauma of what I experienced. But sometimes I wonder if it found me, if it followed my scent or tracked me somehow, if it's curious about the human who saw it and lived to tell the tale. And on those nights I lie awake until dawn, my shotgun loaded beside me, listening to every creak and groan of my house, wondering what's out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. Story 6. I still can't sleep with the curtains open. It's been 4 months since that night, and I'm seeing a therapist twice a week now, but I still wake up in cold sweats around 3 a.m. almost every night. My husband Richard says I'm getting better, but I notice he's installed 3 new motion sensor lights around our property since then, so I know he's still scared too. I never believed in monsters. I'm 42 years old, for God's sake. I have a master's degree in accounting and work at a perfectly boring firm in Manor. Richard runs his own landscaping business. We have 2 Labrador retrievers, Baxter and Cooper, and a mortgage. We're about as normal as it gets, at least we were, until that night in late October. I should probably mention that there had been some weird talk going around town that week. Some guy on Route 30 near Kingston had supposedly seen something big crossing the road with a dead deer. People were talking about it at the grocery store, and my co-worker mentioned it during lunch. I remember laughing it off. "Probably just a bear," I told her. "People around here love to exaggerate." Manor and Kingston are only about 20 minutes apart, and both towns are surrounded by dense woods. We see wildlife all the time. The day it happened was completely ordinary. I'd worked late finishing up month-end reports, and Richard had been installing a water feature for a client in Trobe. We had dinner around 8. I remember it was leftover lasagna, watched some mindless show on Netflix, and went to bed around 11. The dogs were already asleep in their beds in the living room. Everything was normal. I'm usually a solid sleeper, but something woke me up. At first, I thought it was just Richard snoring. But then I realized it was Baxter and Cooper. They were going absolutely insane downstairs, barking like I'd never heard before. It wasn't their normal "someone's at the door" bark, or even "there's a deer in the yard" bark. This was different, frantic, desperate, almost panicked. I nudged Richard awake. "The dogs are freaking out," I whispered, my heart already beating faster. He groaned and rolled over, checking his phone. "It's 3:15 in the morning, Em," he mumbled. But the dogs kept barking, and now they were scratching at the front door like they wanted to get out, or like something wanted to get in. That's when the fear really started to set in. Our dogs are friendly, gentle creatures. They've never acted like this. Richard got up and grabbed the baseball bat he keeps by our bed. "Stay here," he said, but there was no way I was staying alone. I followed him down the stairs, keeping close behind him. The dogs were at the front door, alternating between frenzied barking and these low guttural growls I'd never heard them make before. Their hackles were raised and Baxter was trembling. "What is it, boys?" Richard asked, his voice tense. He reached for the porch light switch next to the door and flipped it on. Our house sits on about 2 acres, with a long gravel driveway that leads to the main road. We have a big front yard with a couple of oak trees and a garden I've been working on for years. The porch light illuminated about half the yard, casting long shadows from the trees, and that's when we saw it. Standing perfectly still in the middle of our yard, maybe 30 feet from our front door, was something. I don't like using the word creature because it sounds made up, but I don't know what else to call it. It was tall. So tall. Later, when the police asked for details, Richard estimated it at around 8 feet. It was massive, with broad shoulders, standing upright on 2 legs, and it was covered in dark, matted hair or fur. But the worst part was that it wasn't moving. Not at all. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing our house, facing us. I couldn't see facial features, just a dark silhouette, but I could feel it watching us. I know how that sounds, but I could feel it, like a physical weight on my skin. I grabbed Richard's arm so hard I later found bruises on his bicep. The dogs were going absolutely berserk now, scratching at the door so violently I was afraid they'd break through. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the dogs. Richard didn't answer. He was frozen, staring out the window. I've never seen him scared. Not when we had that kitchen fire 2 years ago, not when Cooper needed emergency surgery after eating something bad, but he was terrified now. I could feel him trembling under my grip. We stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two, locked in this bizarre standoff with this thing in our yard. It didn't approach the house, it didn't make any threatening moves, it just stood there watching. "I'm calling 911, I finally said, breaking away to grab my cell phone from the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking so badly I had to try 3 times to unlock my phone. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely get the words out. "There's something in our yard," I stammered. "It's huge. It's just standing there. Please send someone right away." I gave our address, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Is it a person?" the dispatcher asked. "No," I said, looking back at the window where Richard still stood, transfixed. "No, it's not a person. It's too big. I don't know what it is." I know how crazy I must have sounded. The dispatcher kept asking questions. Was it an animal? Was it threatening us? Were we safe inside? But I couldn't give clear answers because I didn't know. All I knew was that something completely unnatural was standing in my yard at 3 a.m., and our dogs, who never hurt a fly, were trying to tear through our front door to get at it. The dispatcher promised to send state police right away. Our house is pretty remote, so I knew it would take at least 15 minutes for them to reach us. 15 minutes trapped in this frozen tableau with whatever was outside. "Richard," I whispered, "get away from the window." He didn't move at first, still staring out at the creature. Then he whispered back, "It hasn't blinked. Not once since we've been standing here." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't been able to see its eyes from where I was standing, and I was grateful for that. I tugged on his arm. "Come away from the window, please." He finally stepped back, pulling the curtain closed. "The police are coming?" I nodded, hugging myself. "They said about 15 minutes. The dogs were still going crazy, scratching at the door and whining desperately now. Richard moved to the kitchen and grabbed a large knife. "Just in case," he said. We waited, huddled together in the living room, neither of us brave enough to look outside again. The minutes crawled by like hours. The dogs wouldn't calm down, pacing frantically between the front door and the window, growling continuously. Then, after about 10 minutes, they suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Cooper tilted his head toward the window, ears perked forward. Baxter whined once, softly, and then both dogs slunk back from the door, tails between their legs. They retreated to the corner of the living room, still staring at the door. "What is it?" I whispered, afraid to know the answer. Did it leave? Richard inched toward the window and peered through a tiny gap in the curtains. His shoulders tensed. "It's still there," he said, his voice tight. "It hasn't moved at all." That's when we heard the sirens in the distance, growing louder as they approached our property. A flood of relief washed over me. The police were coming. They would see it too, and we wouldn't be crazy. As the sirens got closer, Richard looked out the window again. "Oh my God," he gasped. "What?" "What is it doing?" I asked, still too terrified to look. It's gone," he said, pulling the curtain all the way open. "It was there a second ago, and now it's just gone." I finally gathered the courage to join him at the window. The yard was empty. The porch light illuminated the same trees, the same garden, but no creature. It had vanished. 2 state police cars turned into our driveway, lights flashing. They pulled up to the house, and 2 officers approached cautiously, flashlights sweeping the yard. Richard opened the door to meet them, but kept the dogs inside with me. The officers were professional, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes as we described what we'd seen. They asked all the expected questions. How tall was it? What exactly did it look like? Had we been drinking? Taking any medications? Had there been any threats against us? Was it possible it was just a large man in dark clothing? "It wasn't a man," Richard insisted. "No man is that big, and it was covered in, I don't know, fur or something." The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "Sir, are you aware there was a reported sighting of something similar in Kingston 2 days ago?" We weren't. They explained about the man who'd nearly crashed his car when something crossed the road, carrying a deer. I remembered the gossip I'd heard, but hadn't connected it to what we'd seen. The officers did a thorough search of our property. They walked the perimeter of the house, checked the woods that border our land, and examined the spot where the creature had been standing. That's when things got weird. Well, weirder. "Ma'am, sir," the older officer called from the yard, "you might want to see this." We went outside, my first time stepping out since the encounter, and joined the officers in the yard. They were shining their flashlights at the ground where the creature had stood. There, in the soft soil of my garden, were impressions. Not footprints exactly, they weren't clear enough for that, but deep depressions where something heavy had stood. They were huge, much larger than a human foot would make, and spaced wider apart than would be natural for a person. "What the hell made these?" Richard asked, his voice shaking slightly. The officer shook his head. "I don't know, sir, but there's something else." He gestured around the area, and that's when I noticed it, the smell. It was faint but unmistakable, like something had died and been left in the sun, mixed with this sharp, acrid odor that reminded me of skunk spray, but worse, much worse. It made my eyes water. "You smell that?" the officer asked. We nodded. It was impossible not to. "Whatever was here," he said carefully, "it left this behind. I've been a hunting guide for 20 years before joining the force, and I've never smelled anything like this in these woods." They took photos of the impressions and filed an official report. They promised to increase patrols in our area and told us to call immediately if we saw anything again. Before they left, the younger officer pulled me aside. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said quietly, "I don't know what you saw tonight, but that man in Kingston, he's not the only one. We've had 3 other reports in the last week, all along this same stretch between here and Trobe, all describing something similar." My blood ran cold. "What do you think it is?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. "I'm not at liberty to speculate officially, but off the record, the Game Commission says there's an unusually high deer population this year. Something might be following the food." After they left, neither Richard nor I could even think about going back to sleep. We sat in the living room with all the lights on, the dogs curled up tightly against us until the sun came up. Richard called a security company first thing in the morning and had motion sensor lights installed all around our property by the end of the week. That was 4 months ago. We haven't seen it again, but sometimes, usually around 3 a.m., the dogs will start growling at nothing. They'll stare at the windows, hackles raised, but won't go near them. On those nights, I swear, I can catch a faint whiff of that same rotting, skunky smell, even with all the windows closed. I've looked online for answers. There are forums full of people who've seen similar things in wooded areas across the country. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but those names seem almost silly compared to what we experienced. There was nothing friendly or curious about what we saw. It felt predatory, patient, like it was assessing us. The wildlife officials say it might be a bear with mange, or even multiple bears that people are mistaking for something else. But I know what I saw was standing on 2 legs, perfectly still, for over 10 minutes. No bear does that. Whatever it was, it's still out there. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and my headlights sweep across the edge of the woods that surround our property, I can't shake the feeling that something is watching from just beyond the tree line, waiting for the right moment to come back. Story 7. I've never told the full story of what happened that night, only bits and pieces to a few close friends, and honestly, they probably think I'm crazy or was just seeing things. But I know what I saw. My husband Michael saw it too, and that woman from town. Well, I'll get to that part. It was August 19th. Michael and I were driving back from my sister's place in Oak Ridge, about 2 hours away from our home in Pine Haven Township. We'd stayed later than planned. My sister's birthday dinner turned into drinks and reminiscing, and before we knew it, it was past midnight. The drive back is mostly on these winding country roads. Not a lot of streetlights, barely any houses, just fields and forests on either side. We were both pretty tired, but Michael insisted he was fine to drive. I was fighting to stay awake myself, drifting in and out while the radio played quietly. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I fully woke up. Michael had slowed the car down considerably, and I noticed we were only going about 15 petmen. I remember being annoyed at first, thinking he was getting too tired to drive. "Why are we going so slow?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on something outside my passenger window. "Look at that," he finally said, his voice tense. "Is that a bear?" I turned to look out into the darkness. The headlights didn't reach very far into the field beside us, but I could make out something large moving around maybe 50 yards away. At first I thought Michael was right. It looked like a bear, hunched over something on the ground. "Should we call someone?" I remember asking. We'd had bear sightings in the area before, but never this close to the road. Michael reached for his phone, but then stopped. "Wait." The thing in the field stood up. I'll never forget that moment. Never. It rose up, and up, and up. Much taller than any bear I'd ever seen. I'm not good with estimates, especially in the dark, but it had to be at least 8 feet tall. Maybe taller. "That's not a bear," Michael whispered. No, it definitely wasn't. I could clearly see its silhouette now against the night sky. Long arms hanging down past its knees, standing on 2 legs, not 4. Its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, with barely any neck visible. It was near this big old oak tree that locals call the Grandfather Oak. It's a landmark everyone around here knows. The thing moved away from the tree, passing by some smaller trees, and that's when I realized it was moving toward the road. Toward us. "Michael," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "Michael, it's coming this way." He didn't say anything. For a horrible second, I thought he was frozen in fear. But then he stepped on the gas pedal, hard. Our tires spun on the gravel before catching, and we shot forward down the road. I turned in my seat to look out the back window. The creature had picked up its pace too, moving with these long, loping strides. It was fast, much faster than something that size should be. I watched it until we rounded a curve in the road, and it disappeared from view. We didn't speak for the next few miles. Michael's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When we finally did talk, it was just practical things, making sure the doors were locked, debating whether to call the police. We decided against it, thinking they'd assume we were drunk or high. When we got home, neither of us could sleep. We sat at the kitchen table with all the lights on, drinking coffee and trying to rationalize what we'd seen. A man in a costume? No, it was too big, moved too naturally. A bear standing on its hind legs? No bear is built like that with those proportions. By morning, we'd convinced ourselves that the darkness and fatigue had played tricks on our eyes. That's what we thought anyway, until we heard about Elena Martinez. I was at work the next day. I teach at the elementary school, and even though it was summer, I was setting up my classroom for the new year. One of the custodians, Frank, came in around noon talking about some crazy story that was going around town. According to Frank, a woman who worked as a housekeeper for the Petersons, a wealthy family who lived just outside Hermione, the next town over, had seen a monster that morning while walking to work. At first, I didn't make the connection, but as Frank described what the woman had seen, a massive, hairy creature that walked upright, my blood ran cold. I left work early and drove straight to the Petersons' place. I'd never met Elena Martinez before, but I needed to talk to her, needed to know if what she saw was the same thing Michael and I had encountered. Mrs. Peterson wasn't happy about me showing up unannounced, but when I mentioned I might have information about what Elena saw, she reluctantly let me in. Elena was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea that looked untouched. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. She was hesitant to talk at first, especially with Mrs. Peterson hovering nearby. I could tell she was worried about being thought of as crazy or unreliable, so I took a risk and told her about what Michael and I had seen just hours before her encounter. The relief on her face was immediate. Someone believed her. Once Mrs. Peterson left us alone, Elena told me everything. She'd been walking to work around 6:50 a.m. She always started early at the Petersons. The morning was cool but clear, just starting to get light. She was about halfway through her usual route when she first noticed the smell. "Like rotten meat and wet dog," she said, wrinkling her nose at the memory. So strong it made my eyes water. Then she heard the breathing, heavy, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running for miles. She thought maybe it was a jogger coming up behind her, but something about the sound made the hair on her arms stand up. Eleanor said she had just passed about 20 feet from a corner when she heard tires screeching nearby. She turned to look and saw a car that had nearly hit the guardrail by the curve in the road. But what made her heart stop was what she saw behind her. A massive creature, covered in dark hair, running upright on two legs, and it was headed straight for her. "Its eyes," she whispered to me, her voice breaking. They were red, not like glowing red from a movie or something, but red, like blood. I could see them clearly, even though it wasn't fully light yet. She said her first instinct was to run, but she was wearing these chunky work shoes that slowed her down. Without thinking, She kicked them off and sprinted barefoot down the road toward the Petersons' house. She never looked back. Not once. She ran until her lungs burned, until she reached the Petersons' front door. When she told Mr. Peterson what happened, he laughed it off, told her she was probably seeing a deer or a bear. Typical. People don't want to believe what they can't explain, but what convinced me that Elena wasn't making it up, besides the fact that her description matched exactly what Michael and I had seen, was what happened after she told her story to another local, a guy named Jim who does maintenance work in the area. Jim took her story seriously enough to go check out the spot where she claimed to have seen the creature, and he found evidence. A footprint, much larger than his size 12 work boot, trampled grass leading away from the road, and Elena's own footprints, just as she described, showing where she'd stopped suddenly and then run. Jim followed the trail of disturbed vegetation and said it looked like the creature had veered off into some bushes, heading toward the baseball field nearby. The trail stopped there, though. Whatever it was had vanished. After talking with Elena, I went home and told Michael everything. We decided to drive out to the spot ourselves to see if we could find anything that might explain what we'd both encountered. Part of me was hoping to find some rational explanation, maybe a prank or misidentification, but deep down, I knew what we'd seen wasn't something that could be easily explained away. We arrived at the corner Eleanor had described around 4:00 p.m. The area was quiet, just the occasional car passing by. We parked on the shoulder and got out to look around. The footprint Jim had found was still visible, though it had been partially filled in with dust from the road. It was enormous, easily twice the size of Michael's foot, and he wears a size 11. The impression wasn't just big, it was deep, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. We followed the path of trampled grass that led into the bushes. There was a distinct trail, like something large had pushed through, breaking branches and crushing vegetation underfoot. The trail led toward the baseball field, just as Jim had said, but then seemed to disappear. As we stood there, trying to make sense of it all, a county sheriff's car pulled up behind our vehicle. The officer, a woman named Deputy Reyes, who I recognized from community events, asked what we were doing. I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy, but Michael just came out with it. He told her about our sighting the night before and about Elena's encounter that morning. I expected dismissal, maybe even mockery, but Deputy Reyes's expression remained neutral. When Michael finished, she looked around thoughtfully before saying, "You're not the first people to report something like this in the area." Apparently, the driver who had nearly crashed, the one Elena had seen, had called in to report a large animal in the road that morning. The driver, a local man named Taylor, said he'd slammed on his brakes when he saw what he described as the biggest damn thing I've ever seen step out from the trees. Deputy Reyes wouldn't give us more details, citing privacy concerns, but she did take our statements and said she'd file a report. She didn't dismiss us or treat us like we were crazy, which was something at least. As we were getting ready to leave, Michael spotted something caught on a broken branch in the bushes, a tuft of coarse, dark hair. Deputy Reyes collected it in an evidence bag, though she seemed skeptical that it would lead to anything conclusive. It's been a week since that night, and I still can't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I'm outside after dark. Michael and I have installed extra security lights around our property, and we make sure all the doors and windows are locked before going to bed. Elena told me yesterday that she's quit her job at the Petersons. She can't bring herself to walk that route anymore, not even in broad daylight. I don't blame her. The local paper ran a small story about unconfirmed wildlife sightings in the area, but there was no mention of the creature's size or the fact that it walked upright. Just a generic warning for residents to be cautious and report any unusual animal activity. I've spent hours online reading about similar encounters in other parts of the country. Some people call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others have different names for it. Whatever it was, I know what I saw. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, convinced I can hear heavy breathing outside my window. Michael says it's just the wind in the trees, but I'm not so sure. That thing was real. It was out there in that field, and then on that road behind Elena. Who's to say it isn't still out there, watching and waiting? I keep thinking about those red eyes Elena described. I didn't see its eyes when Michael and I spotted it. We were too far away, and it was too dark. But the thought of those eyes watching me from the darkness of the woods behind our house, I can't get it out of my head. The sheriff's department never followed up with us about the hair sample. When Michael called to ask, they said it had been sent to a lab for analysis, but that these things take time. It felt like a brush-off. I don't know what to do with this experience. I can't just forget it or pretend it didn't happen. Whatever we saw that night was real. It was massive. It was moving with purpose, and it seemed intelligent enough to pursue both our car and later Eleanor. The most terrifying part isn't even the creature itself. It's the not knowing. Not knowing what it was, where it came from, or if it's still out there. Not knowing if we'll encounter it again, or if next time we won't be lucky enough to escape. All I know for sure is that when I drive that road now, I don't slow down for anything, and I never ever look out into the fields. Story 8. I've been sitting on this for almost 2 years now, and I still don't know what to make of it. I've only told a couple of close friends who either think I'm crazy or saw a bear. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. This was something else entirely. It happened on August 20th, 2021. I remember the date because it was the night before my sister's birthday, and I was planning to drive to her place the next morning. My friends Tara and Carlos had come over to hang out at my place. I'm Jason, by the way. We'd had a few beers, nothing crazy, just enough to take the edge off after a long work week. Around midnight, Carlos suggested we go for a drive. It was a clear night, warm but not too hot, and we were all feeling a bit restless. We lived in a small town outside of Donahue where there's not much to do after dark, so sometimes we'd just drive around, find a quiet spot, and talk or listen to music. I was driving my old Honda Civic. Carlos was in the passenger seat and Tara was in the back. We ended up on this dirt road that runs parallel to the railroad tracks, about 2 miles outside of town. There's a crossing there, but hardly anyone uses it at night. We pulled over maybe 50 yards from the crossing, turned off the headlights, and just sat there talking with the windows down. The conversation had turned to some local urban legend Carlos had heard about. I don't even remember what it was now, when Tara suddenly went quiet mid-sentence. She was facing the passenger side window, looking out toward the tracks. "Guys," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is that?" I followed her gaze but didn't see anything at first. It was dark out there, with just a sliver of moon providing any light. Then Carlos saw it too. "Holy shit," he muttered. "Do you see that? By that big oak tree near the crossing." And then I saw it. A massive silhouette standing next to the tree. Even from that distance I could tell it was huge, way taller than any person should be. At first, I thought maybe it was just a shadow or something, but then it moved, stepping away from the tree toward the tracks. The way it moved wasn't right. It was fluid, but wrong somehow, like watching a person move underwater, that same kind of slow, deliberate motion, but on land. Its arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. We all sat there frozen, trying to process what we were seeing. I remember thinking it must be some guy in a costume, but who the hell would be out there at midnight in a costume, and why would they be that big? Then we heard the train coming. It was still a ways off, but you could hear the rumble and feel the slight vibration. The headlight from the train started to illuminate the tracks in the distance, and that's when we got a clear look at it. The light hit it from behind at first, creating this massive shadow that seemed to stretch forever. Then as the train got closer, the light hit it directly, and for maybe 3 seconds we could see it clearly. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, covered in dark hair or fur, not like a costume, but like actual fur growing from its body. It had broad shoulders, a massive chest, and those unnaturally long arms. But what I remember most was its face. The train light caught it just right, and I could see its features for a split second. It wasn't a mask. The face moved, reacted to the light. It had deep-set eyes that reflected the light, a broad, flat nose, and a mouth that seemed almost human, but not quite. When the light hit it, the thing turned toward the train, then toward our car, like it had just noticed us. That's when Tara screamed. I've never heard a scream like that before. Pure terror. It snapped me out of my frozen state, and I fumbled to start the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The creature started moving toward us, not running, but this purposeful stride that covered ground way faster than it should have. That's when the engine finally turned over. I slammed it into drive and hit the gas so hard the tires spun in the dirt before catching. Carlos was yelling, "Go, go, go!" And Tara was still screaming in the back seat. I fishtailed onto the road and floored it. The speedometer hit 70 on a dirt road, which was absolutely insane. But I wasn't thinking straight. All I knew was that I needed to get as far away from that thing as possible. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see it chasing us or something, but there was nothing but darkness behind us. After about 5 minutes of driving like a maniac, I finally slowed down. We were all breathing hard, and nobody spoke for what felt like forever. Finally, Carlos said, "What the fuck was that?" None of us had an answer. We drove straight back to my place, and none of us wanted to go home alone that night. We stayed up until dawn, jumping at every sound outside. I kept thinking I saw movement in the yard through the window, but it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. We tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe it was some weird shadow effect. Maybe we were seeing things, but deep down, we all knew what we saw wasn't natural. I ended up not going to my sister's the next day. I called and made up some excuse about not feeling well. I didn't want to drive alone, and I definitely didn't want to try explaining to her what had happened. She would have thought I was crazy or drunk or both. I spent the next few days in a fog, barely sleeping, constantly looking over my shoulder. Then I heard about 2 other people who had seen something similar that same night. And that's when I really started freaking out. The first was this guy named Benjamin Harris. I didn't know him personally, but a friend of a friend did. Apparently, he was driving near St. Vincent Cemetery around 9:20 that night, so about 3 hours before our encounter, when something huge and hairy ran in front of his car. He described it almost exactly like what we saw, and get this. His car stalled right after the thing crossed the road. Just died. Wouldn't start for several minutes. His car was practically new. Never had problems before. Then I heard about Thomas Edwards. He was driving near Keystone Park around 10 p.m. that same night when he saw it standing by the road. He actually stopped his car and got a good look at it. Said it was over 6 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with these unnaturally long arms. But the detail that really got me was that he said it had glowing red eyes. We hadn't seen the eyes clearly, but the way they reflected the train's light, it could have been red. Thomas also mentioned a smell, said there was this overwhelming stench right before he spotted it. I suddenly remembered there had been a weird smell that night by the tracks. I had assumed it was just the usual train smell, oil and metal and whatever, but thinking back, it was different. Musky, almost rotten, but also weirdly animal-like. The part that keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, it's knowing that this thing was moving around our area all night. From the cemetery to Keystone Park to the railroad crossing where we were, that's a distance of about 15 miles. It was traveling, and for what purpose? Was it looking for something or someone? I've spent countless hours researching since that night. I've gone down rabbit holes about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and every other cryptid you can imagine. I've looked at blurry photos and read eyewitness accounts, and so many of them match what we saw. The height, the fur, the way it moved, the stench. It's all consistent. Carlos doesn't like to talk about it anymore. He's convinced himself it was a bear or some guy in a costume playing a prank. Tara moved away about 3 months after it happened. She said it was for a job, but I think she just couldn't stand being in a place where something like that might be lurking in the woods. I'm still here, though. I don't go out at night anymore if I can help it. I've installed extra lights around my house and security cameras that I check obsessively. I keep a baseball bat by my bed, though I don't know what good it would do against something that size. Sometimes I drive by that railroad crossing during the day. I've even gotten out and looked around a few times, searching for footprints or hair or any evidence that what we saw was real. I never find anything, which makes me question my sanity sometimes. But then I remember the look on Tara's face, the absolute terror in her eyes, and I know we all experienced the same thing. I've tried to tell myself it was just a bear. God knows I want to believe that. But bears don't walk upright for that long. They don't have faces that look almost human. They don't have eyes that seem to look into you like they understand what you are and are sizing you up. The worst part is the not knowing. Not knowing what it was, not knowing if it's still out there, not knowing if I'll ever see it again. I check the local news regularly for any strange sightings or unexplained incidents. So far, there hasn't been anything as clear as what happened that night, but there have been reports of strange noises in the woods, pets going missing, people feeling like they're being watched while hiking. Last week I was taking out the trash at dusk when I got that feeling, that intense, primal sensation of being watched. I looked toward the tree line behind my house, and for a split second I thought I saw movement, something large shifting in the shadows. I ran back inside and locked all the doors and windows. It could have been nothing, probably was nothing. But ever since that night by the railroad tracks, I can't shake the feeling that it saw us just as clearly as we saw it, that it remembers us, that maybe, just maybe, it's curious about us too. I don't know what to do with this experience. I can't explain it, can't forget it, and most days I wish it had never happened. Before that night, the world made sense. Now, I know there are things out there that shouldn't exist, but do. Things that walk our forests when we're not looking, that cross our roads in the dark of night, that stand at the edge of civilization watching us, waiting. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the woods at night, crossing railroad tracks and roads, its long arms swinging at its sides. And sometimes, on the quietest nights when the wind is still and the moon is bright, I swear I can hear something moving outside my window. Something big, something that doesn't belong. I still don't know what I saw that night, but I know it saw me too. Story 9. The Key. I've been debating whether to share this for months. My wife thinks I should just try to forget about it, but I can't. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or has some explanation that makes sense. This happened last August 20th, around 9:15 p.m. My wife and I were driving back from my sister's place in Hillside, taking the back route to Millwood, which cuts through some pretty dense forest. It was already dark but clear, one of those warm summer nights with a half moon giving just enough light to see the tree line on either side of the road. We were about 15 minutes into the drive when my wife Jenny asked me to slow down because she thought she saw something move in the trees to our right. I wasn't really paying attention to the woods. I was more focused on the road, since there are always deer in that area. That stretch of road is notorious for animal crossings, so I eased off the gas a bit. Not even 10 seconds later, something huge stepped out onto the road ahead of us. I can't emphasize this enough. It was huge. At first, my brain tried to process it as a bear, standing on its hind legs, but that didn't fit. It was too tall, too human-like in its proportions, but not human. Not even close. I slammed on the brakes, but we were going about 45 meters/hour, and there just wasn't enough time or distance. I'll never forget the sound of the impact, a dull thud that seemed to reverberate through the entire car. It felt like hitting a wall, not an animal. Here's where things get really messed up. When we hit this thing, it didn't fly forward like a deer would. It didn't roll over the hood. It just disappeared, literally vanished into thin air the moment of impact. 1 second it was there, massive, dark, definitely solid enough to damage my car, and the next second nothing. Jenny was screaming. I was in shock, just gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. I pulled over to the side of the road, hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the key to shut off the engine. We sat there for a minute, just trying to breathe. Jenny kept asking what the hell we'd hit, and I couldn't answer her. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and got out to check the damage and look for whatever we'd hit. The front of my Subaru was dented in, the right headlight cracked. But there was nothing on the road. No blood, no hair, no body, nothing. I walked back about 100 feet, scanning the road and the shoulders with my flashlight. Still nothing. It was like we'd hit a ghost, except ghosts don't dent steel. What still burned into my memory is what the thing looked like in those brief seconds before impact. It was at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur. The build was muscular but lean, not bulky like a bear, and it moved on 2 legs, not 4. The way it walked was purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. It had swung its arms as it moved, almost like a person would, but the arms were longer, hanging down past what would be its knees. I didn't get a clear look at its face. Thank God for that, I guess. All I remember is that it had a massive sloped forehead and deep-set eyes that caught the headlights for just a split second. Jenny was freaking out, begging me to get back in the car. She was convinced whatever we hit was still out there, maybe injured and dangerous. I was more confused than scared at that point. Nothing made sense. How could something that big, something solid enough to damage my car, just vanish? We drove straight to the Pine Haven police station. I couldn't just go home and pretend nothing happened. Looking back, I almost wish I had. The officer at the desk, a woman named Brennan, took one look at my face and immediately asked what was wrong. I tried to explain what happened as calmly as possible, but I could tell by her expression that she thought I was either drunk or crazy. She asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't, and then made me describe exactly what I saw and where. Officer Brennan took down all the details, but I could tell she was skeptical. Who wouldn't be? I hit a giant ape man with my car and then it disappeared. Sounds insane even to me, and I was there. She asked Jenny what she saw, and Jenny just said something big because honestly, she didn't get as good a look at it as I did. She had been looking down at her phone when I yelled and only looked up right before impact. The worst part was when Officer Brennan went outside to check my car. The dent was still there, the headlights still cracked, but there was no blood, no hair, no tissue, nothing to indicate what I'd hit. She told me they'd send someone out to check the area in the morning, but her tone made it clear she didn't expect them to find anything. We finally got home around midnight. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my head. I know what I saw. I know it was real. But how do you explain something that vanishes on impact? The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. Around noon, Officer Brennan called to tell me they'd sent Sergeant Cooper out to the area I'd described, and they'd found something interesting, footprints, large ones, 3-toed footprints that didn't match any known animal in the region. My heart nearly stopped. This was validation, proof I wasn't losing my mind. She asked if I could come down to the station again, which I did immediately. When I got there, Sergeant Cooper showed me some photos they'd taken. The prints were massive. He said they measured about 13 inches long. They weren't shaped like human feet at all, 3 thick toes, deeply impressed into the ground. The The stride between prints was insane, nearly 5 feet apart. Whatever made those tracks was big and could cover a lot of ground quickly. Cooper explained they'd followed the tracks from the road into the woods. They went through a muddy area, crossed a creek, and continued up an embankment into thicker forest where they eventually lost the trail. In one section of mud, there was a slide mark, like whatever made the tracks had slipped. Cooper said based on how deep the prints were, especially at that slide, the creature had to be extremely heavy. The craziest part? These weren't the first tracks like this they'd found. Cooper told me similar prints had been discovered in at least 4 other locations around the county over the past few weeks. They'd been keeping it quiet to avoid causing panic. I asked the obvious question. If this thing was real and solid enough to leave tracks, how did it just vanish when my car hit it? Cooper had no answer for that. He just said, "I've been a cop for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like these tracks. I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but I can't tell you what else it could be." After I left the station, I drove past the spot where it happened. In daylight, it looked so ordinary, just a stretch of road cutting through the woods. It was hard to believe that something so bizarre had occurred there less than 24 hours earlier. Over the next few days, I started hearing other strange stories from around the area. A friend who works at the local feed store told me farmers were coming in talking about their animals acting weird. Horses refusing to go into their stables at night. Cows clustering together in the middle of fields instead of spreading out to graze. Dogs barking at nothing in the dark. One story really got to me. Margaret Simmons, who breeds horses just outside of Latrobe, had a horse completely freak out while she was transporting it. This was supposedly a well-trained, calm animal that had never given her problems before. It went absolutely berserk in the trailer, kicking and thrashing so violently she thought it would kill itself. When she finally got it calmed down, the horse was covered in sweat, trembling all over. And this happened on the same road where I had my encounter, just a few miles north. I tried to go back to normal life after that, but things haven't been the same. I jump at shadows. I refuse to drive that road after dark. Jenny thinks I'm developing some kind of PTSD from the incident. Maybe she's right. About a week after it happened, I went to a local body shop to get an estimate on fixing my car. The guy examining the damage paused for a long time, looking at the dent with a puzzled expression. He asked me what I'd hit, and I just said, "A deer," because what else could I say? He shook his head and said, "This isn't consistent with a deer strike. The impact pattern is all wrong." When I asked what he meant, he explained that the dent suggested I'd hit something much more solid and heavy than a deer and at a higher point of impact. He estimated whatever I hit stood about 6 to 7 feet tall based on where the main damage was. I didn't tell him his assessment matched exactly what I'd seen. The repair cost was going to be over $3,000. I still haven't fixed it. Part of me wants to keep the dent as proof that something real happened that night. A month or so later, I ran into Sergeant Cooper at the gas station. I asked if they'd found anything else about those tracks. He looked around to make sure nobody was listening, then told me they'd found more prints, this time near Rockwell Creek, about 12 miles from where I had my encounter. Same pattern, same size. But they also found something else, tufts of dark, coarse hair caught on a barbed wire fence nearby. They'd sent the hair to a lab for analysis, but hadn't gotten results back yet. I asked him if he believed in Bigfoot now. He didn't answer directly, just said, 25 years in law enforcement. You think you've seen everything. Then something comes along that makes you question everything you thought you knew. It's been almost 5 months now, and I still don't have any real answers. The lab results on the hair came back inconclusive, not matching any known species, but not enough DNA to make a determination. The official police report on my incident lists it as a possible collision with unidentified large animal, which feels like a joke. The footprints stopped appearing around late September. The weird animal behavior gradually returned to normal. People stopped talking about it. Life went on, but I can't forget. I know what I saw. I know something impossible happened that night. How does a solid creature, heavy enough to dent my car, just vanish on impact? It defies everything I understand about reality. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, the sound of that impact still echoing in my head. In my dreams, I always see those eyes catching the headlights for that brief moment. Deep, intelligent eyes that seem to look right through me. I've researched similar encounters online and found stories that make my blood run cold. People describe seeing similar creatures that seem to appear and disappear at will. Some theories suggest these beings exist partially in another dimension or reality, able to phase in and out of our world somehow. It sounds like science fiction, but how else do you explain what happened? What bothers me most isn't the fear. It's the not knowing. Did I kill it when I hit it? Did it just teleport away? Is it still out there in those woods? Every time I drive near that area now, I scan the tree line, half expecting to see it watching me. I don't know if I'll ever have answers. All I know is that something impossible happened to me on that road that night, and nothing has felt quite real since then. The world I thought I understood has cracks in it now, and sometimes I catch glimpses of something much stranger beyond those cracks. Story 10. I never thought I'd be one of those people who claims to have seen something impossible. I'm not into horror movies, paranormal stuff, or even ghost stories around campfires. I'm a practical guy who works construction, pays his bills on time, and usually spends weekends fishing with buddies. That's actually how this whole thing started. We were planning a fishing trip. It was August 21st, just after midnight. Me, Joe, my buddy Marcus, and our friend Denise decided to grab some night crawlers for bait at the Pinecrest Country Club between Greensburg and Jeanette. The country club's grounds have these perfect moist areas where you can find the fattest worms, way better than the dried-up ones they sell at gas stations. We've done this plenty of times before, and yeah, I know it's technically trespassing, but the place is dead quiet at night, and we're always careful not to damage anything. The night was warm, but not sticky, with just enough moonlight to see without tripping over ourselves. We parked in the little gravel lot by the maintenance shed, away from the main entrance where security might drive by. The three of us had flashlights. Though we tried not to use them much to avoid drawing attention, Marcus brought this little red headlamp that makes it easier to spot the worms without scaring them. We'd been collecting for maybe 15 minutes, our plastic containers starting to fill up with fat night crawlers when I straightened up to stretch my back. That's when I saw them. About 20 yards away, on the smooth surface of the golf green, were two figures. I don't know how else to describe them. At first glance, I thought maybe it was a couple of teenagers messing around, but something felt immediately wrong about their silhouettes. "Guys," I whispered, nudging Marcus with my elbow. "Look over there." They were hunched over, not standing fully upright, and they seemed to be examining something on the ground. The way they moved wasn't right, not like people move. It was more fluid, more animal-like, but definitely not on four legs like a deer or coyote. "What the fuck is that?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking a little. Denise grabbed his arm. "Are those bears?" But I knew they weren't bears. I've seen plenty of bears while hunting, and these weren't bears. For one thing, they were standing on two legs. For another, their proportions were all wrong, long arms, shorter legs, and a strange slope to their backs. The three of us froze, not sure what to do. The creatures weren't moving toward us, so we just stood there watching. After a few seconds, I could tell these things were black, not dark brown or grey, but black, and one was bigger than the other. The larger one looked maybe 5 or 6 feet tall, while the smaller one was around 4 feet. That's when Marcus and Denise lost their nerve. "Fuck this! I'm out!" Marcus hissed, and he started backing up toward the car. Denise was right behind him, practically running backward to keep her eyes on the creatures. but I couldn't move. I wasn't exactly afraid, more like completely mesmerized. I stood there watching them for what must have been 2 full minutes. They were moving around on the green, sometimes stooping lower, sometimes standing more upright. And that's when it hit me. They looked like the descriptions I'd heard of Bigfoot. Not the goofy cartoon Sasquatch, but something primitive and wild. The weirdest part was how they moved. When they decided to go from one spot to another, they didn't lumber or shuffle like you'd expect something that size to move. They were insanely fast, like unnaturally fast. 1 second, they were examining something on the green, and in the time it would take to snap your fingers, they'd moved 15 feet to another spot. It wasn't like running exactly, more like they just appeared in a different place almost instantly. I finally got up the courage to shine my flashlight directly at them. It wasn't very powerful, just a basic hardware store flashlight, but when the beam hit them, I could see shaggy black hair covering their bodies. They seemed to notice the light, their movements becoming more alert, but they didn't run or seem particularly frightened. After another minute, I finally backed away and hurried to the car where Marcus and Denise were waiting, engine already running. "Jesus Christ, Joe, what the hell were you doing?" Marcus yelled when I jumped in the back seat. "Did you see them clearly?" Denise asked, her face pale even in the dim dashboard light. "What were they?" "I don't know," I said honestly, my heart still pounding, but they weren't bears, and they definitely weren't people. Marcus peeled out of the gravel lot, the tires kicking up stones as we sped away. The whole drive back to town, we kept looking in the mirrors, half expecting to see something following us. Nobody said much until we were back on the main road with streetlights and the occasional passing car. "We should call someone," Denise finally said. "Like animal control or something?" Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. "And tell them what? We saw Bigfoot while trespassing at the country club at midnight." He had a point. Who would believe us? But I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. Those weren't any animals I recognized, and the way they moved, that impossible, blur-like speed, kept replaying in my mind. When we got back to my place, I couldn't just let it go. I called my brother Anthony, who lives a few blocks away. Anthony's always been into weird stuff, conspiracy theories, cryptids, all that, and I knew he'd at least listen without thinking I was crazy. "Dude, you have to come over right now," I told him when he picked up, sounding groggy from sleep. "It's almost 1 a.m, Joe. What's going on?" "Just get over here, and call Kevin and Tyler too." Within 30 minutes, Anthony showed up with Kevin and Tyler. We all crammed into my living room while Marcus, Denise and I tried to explain what we'd seen. Anthony was practically bouncing with excitement, while Kevin and Tyler looked skeptical but intrigued. "We have to go back," Anthony said immediately, "right now, before they're gone." Part of me wanted to say hell no, but another part was desperate to prove we hadn't imagined the whole thing. After some heated discussion, we decided to return. Me, Anthony, Kevin, and Tyler. Denise flat out refused to go back, and Marcus decided to stay with her, claiming someone should make sure she gets home safe. I think he was just too freaked out to return. So the 4 of us piled into Anthony's SUV and headed back to Pinecrest. This time, Anthony suggested we approach from a different angle, using the service road that maintenance vehicles take. This would let us get closer to the green without having to walk as far, and we could use the headlights to see better. The drive back was tense. Kevin kept asking detailed questions. How tall were they exactly? What did their faces look like? Did they make any sounds? But I realized there was a lot I couldn't answer. I hadn't seen their faces clearly, and they'd been completely silent the whole time. "Maybe it was just some weird-looking deer," Tyler suggested half-heartedly. "Deer don't stand on 2 legs for minutes at a time," I said, "and they don't move the way these things moved." When we reached the country club, Anthony drove slowly along the service road with the lights off until we were about 50 yards from the green where I'd seen the creatures. Then he positioned the SUV so the headlights would illuminate the area when turned on. "Ready?" he asked, his hand on the light switch. We all nodded, and he flipped on the brights. The sudden flood of light revealed the green, and there they were, the same two creatures, still hunched over and examining the ground. My breath caught in my throat. They were real. I hadn't imagined them. The moment the headlights hit them, they reacted, not with fear exactly, but with incredible speed. In that bizarre, too-fast movement, they were suddenly 20 yards away behind a row of pine trees that lined the road. We all saw it happen, and the car went completely silent as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. "Holy shit," Kevin whispered, his face pressed against the window. "Let's get a closer look," Anthony said, already opening his door. I wanted to tell him to stop, but curiosity overrode my fear. The four of us got out of the SUV, leaving the headlights on and pointing toward the trees. We moved cautiously, staying close together, each of us armed with a flashlight. As we approached the pine trees, I kept expecting to see the creatures dart away again, but there was no movement. The trees cast long shadows despite the headlights, creating perfect hiding spots. We spread out slightly, scanning the tree line with our flashlights. "There's nothing here," Tyler said after a minute, lowering his light. "Maybe they ran off." "No way," Anthony insisted. "They were just here. They have to be—" A sound from behind us cut him off. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunching of pine needles. But in the tense silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. All four of us spun around at once, flashlights swinging wildly until they converged on a single point at the edge of the woods. Something was emerging from the trees. This wasn't one of the creatures we'd been following. This was something else entirely. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8, and it was walking directly toward us with slow, deliberate steps. Unlike the other two, this one stood fully upright, its silhouette unmistakably humanoid but too large, too proportionally wrong to be human. The beams of our flashlights illuminated patches of its body, dense black hair covering massive shoulders, impossibly long arms that hung down past its knees, hands with fingers that looked more like claws. But it was the face that turned my blood to ice. Where its eyes should have been, 2 red points glowed in the darkness, reflecting our flashlights like a cat's eyes, but much, much brighter. They weren't even positioned right on its face. One seemed lower than the other, giving it a nightmarishly asymmetrical appearance. I couldn't make out a mouth or nose, just those glowing red eyes staring right at us. Tyler dropped his flashlight, the beam spinning crazily across the ground. Kevin made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like all the air being pushed out of his lungs at once. Anthony grabbed my shoulder so hard it hurt. "Joe," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Joe, we need to go, now." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The thing was still walking toward us, covering ground with those slow, purposeful strides. It made no sound now, except for the soft crush of grass beneath its feet. The smaller creatures were forgotten entirely. This was something different, something worse. What broke the spell was when it stopped, about 30 yards away, and tilted its head to one side. The motion was so unnatural, so wrong, that it finally unlocked my frozen muscles. We all turned and ran for the SUV, not looking back, tripping over ourselves in panic. I don't remember getting into the car. I just remember Anthony gunning the engine, the tires spinning in the grass before finding purchase. As we sped away, I finally looked back through the rear window. It stood in the headlights' fading glow, still watching us, those red eyes visible even as the distance between us grew. And then, in that same impossible blur of movement I'd seen with the smaller creatures, it was gone. Not running away, not hiding. Just gone, as if it had never been there at all. None of us spoke until we were back on the main highway, the lights of Woodland Mall visible in the distance, providing some small comfort. "What the fuck was that?" Tyler finally asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said. "I really don't know." We've told a few people about what happened that night, but mostly we get disbelief or jokes about drinking too much. The thing is, none of us were drinking. None of us were on anything. We were just looking for fishing bait and stumbled onto something that shouldn't exist. I've been back to Pinecrest during the day a few times since then, trying to find footprints or hair or anything that would prove what we saw. There's never anything there. But I won't go at night. Neither will Anthony, Kevin, or Tyler. Marcus and Denise won't even talk about it anymore. Sometimes I wonder if the smaller creatures were juveniles and the large one was protecting them. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there, moving between the woods around Greensburg, Jeanette, and beyond. But mostly, I try not to think about those red, misaligned eyes and the way they seemed to look right through me. Like it wasn't just seeing me, but seeing into me. I don't fish anymore, and I definitely don't hunt for night crawlers. Some things are better left alone in the dark. Story 11. I've been putting off writing this for weeks because every time I try, my hands start shaking so bad I can barely type. But I need to get this out. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw, or maybe writing it down will help me stop having nightmares about those eyes. This happened on August 21st, about a month ago. I live in a 2-story house on the outskirts of Derry with my teenage daughter Ashley. It's usually quiet out here. We've got about 2 acres, some woods behind us. Nice neighbors, but not too close. I've always felt safe here, not anymore. That night was really warm, like most nights this summer. I had my bedroom window cracked open about 6 inches to let in some air. My room's on the 2nd floor, and I've never worried about leaving the window open before. I mean, it's 9 feet off the ground. Who's going to climb up there? I went to bed around 11:30 after watching some TV. Nothing unusual. I remember falling asleep pretty quickly because I'd worked overtime at the hospital. I'm a nurse. Then, sometime around 2:30 a.m., something woke me up. It wasn't a noise exactly. It was more like a feeling. You know that sensation when someone's watching you? That's what I felt. My eyes snapped open, and I was instantly wide awake. The first thing I noticed was that my curtains were pulled back slightly. I definitely hadn't left them like that. We have those sheer drapes that hang down, and they were pushed to the side like someone had deliberately moved them. And then I saw it. There was a face looking in at me through my window. A face. 9 feet off the ground. I froze. Completely froze. It was only about 3 feet away from me. I could see it so clearly because our motion sensor security light must have triggered when it approached the house, so half its face was illuminated. It wasn't human. I know that sounds crazy, but I swear on my life it wasn't human. The face was roundish with dark hair, though I could only see from the nose up because of the windowsill. Its nose was incredibly flat and pushed back against its face, almost like a gorilla, but not quite. What will haunt me forever were the eyes. They were perfectly round, not oval like human eyes, and set deep into really prominent cheekbones. The eyes were completely dark, no whites visible at all, no eyelashes, no eyebrows, nothing. Under those eyes were these, I don't know how to describe them, layers of skin or wrinkles that looked almost burnt. The skin around the eyes and nose seemed flesh-colored, but off somehow. The cheekbones were extremely high, with these flat eye sockets and those deep, deep eyes. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then I shifted slightly in bed, and that's when it moved. It straightened up, which meant it must have been stooping down to look in and backed away from the window. The curtains fell back into place. The strangest part? I didn't hear anything. If something that size, and it had to be huge to peer into a 2nd-story window, moved away from my house. I should have heard footsteps, branches breaking, something, but there was nothing, just complete silence. I was terrified to get out of bed, but I couldn't stay there with that window open. I just couldn't. So I ran to Ashley's room. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak, but I managed to tell her someone or something had been looking in my window. She thought I'd had a nightmare at first, but she could see how terrified I was. Ashley came with me back to my room and closed and locked the window. She's always been braver than me. She went to look out and suddenly jerked back and grabbed my arm. Her face went white, and she whispered, "Mom, I just saw the biggest shadow ever." We have trees in our yard that cast shadows when the security light is on, but she said this was way bigger than any tree shadow. It moved across the lawn toward the woods. Then we heard it. Heavy, heavy footsteps outside, not like a person walking, heavier. And then the smell hit us. It was the most disgusting odor I've ever experienced in my life, like something dead or old rotten meat. It was so strong, it seemed to seep through the closed windows and filled the entire house. That smell stayed in our house for days afterward. No amount of air freshener or open windows could get rid of it completely. We sat huddled in my room until morning. Neither of us slept. I kept thinking about those eyes, how they had looked directly into mine with what seemed like intelligence. Not animal intelligence, something else. The next morning, Ashley told me something that made my blood run cold. The night before my encounter, she'd come home late from hanging out with friends, around 4 a.m. When she was getting out of her car, she heard this weird metallic rattling sound coming from our backyard. Our dogs were going absolutely crazy, barking and snarling at something. She said she could hear movement, something big moving around back there. But she figured it was a deer or something and came inside. I didn't report what happened right away. I was afraid people would think I was crazy. But 2 days later I heard rumors that local police had shot and killed some kind of creature in the woods near town. I don't know if it was true, but it pushed me to finally call the police. When I gave my statement to Chief Dawson, he seemed unusually interested in my description of the face. He kept asking me to go over the details again, the eyes, the nose, the skin. He wrote everything down carefully and said, "You looked it square in the eyes from just 3 feet away." The way he said it gave me chills, like he knew exactly what I was talking about. I asked him if other people had reported seeing something similar. He was vague, but admitted there had been incidents in the area. He told me not to discuss what I'd seen with anyone else for now. That really freaked me out. After he left, I started researching online. There were other sightings around Derry this summer. People reporting strange noises, missing pets, weird footprints. Some called it Bigfoot, but that name seems almost silly compared to what I saw. This wasn't some fuzzy forest creature. The intelligence in those eyes. It knew what it was doing. It deliberately pulled back my curtain to look at me. It was curious about me. The worst part is not knowing if it will come back. I've installed security cameras now, and I keep every window locked day and night. I sleep with my bedroom door locked, and a chair propped under the doorknob. I can't sleep without the TV on, for noise and light. Ashley has been staying with friends more often. She says the house feels different now. I feel it too. Like once something that doesn't belong here has entered your space, it never fully leaves. I've been debating whether to move, but where would I go? How do I know it wouldn't follow me, or that there aren't more of them elsewhere? And to be honest, part of me feels like I need to stay alert and aware in case it comes back. At least here I know what I'm dealing with. The other night, I heard something on the roof. Just a brief scraping sound, like something heavy shifting position. I sat up all night with a baseball bat listening. Nothing else happened, but every muscle in my body was tense, waiting. I keep replaying that moment when our eyes met. In that instant, I felt like it was assessing me, cataloguing me, almost like it was thinking, so this is what they look like up close. which makes me wonder, was it as curious about me as I was terrified of it? I sometimes wonder if anyone would believe me if I hadn't gotten such a clear look at it. If the security light hadn't been on, if I'd only seen a shadow or movement, I might have convinced myself it was something else. But I saw it too clearly. I can still draw every detail of that face from memory, though I refuse to actually do it. Drawing it feels like it might summon it somehow. Chief Dawson called me last week to follow up. He asked if I'd experienced anything else unusual. I told him about the sound on the roof, and he said they'd increase patrols in my area. Before hanging up, he said something odd. Whatever you do, don't try to communicate with it if it returns. Like that thought would ever cross my mind. But his warning makes me think the police know more than they're saying. Maybe these things have been around longer than anyone admits. Maybe they've tried communicating before. I haven't told anyone at work about this. What would I say? Oh, I had a 9-foot-tall, unidentified creature peeping in my second-story bedroom window. They'd think I was having a breakdown. Sometimes I wonder if I am, but then I remember the smell. That wasn't in my imagination. And Ashley saw the shadow too, so now I sit here at night, listening to every creak and groan of the house, wondering if it's coming back. I've started keeping a journal of any unusual sounds or smells. There's been nothing concrete, but sometimes the dogs refuse to go into certain parts of the yard. They'll just stand there, hackles raised, staring into the trees. Is it still out there, watching my house, waiting for me to let my guard down and open a window again? I don't know, but I know what I saw. Those eyes, that face, the way it moved. It was real, it was here, and it saw me too. Story 12. I've never told the full story of what happened that day. Not to my friends, not on social media, just fragments to my parents and that investigator guy who came around asking questions after word got out. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. I know what I saw, though. I'm not crazy, and I wasn't making it up for attention. I was just a normal 12-year-old girl standing in my front yard. It was August 21st last year, around 5:30 in the evening. I remember the time because my mom had just called out that dinner would be ready in about half an hour. We live in this housing development off Greensburg, Mount Pleasant Road. It's not like we're in the middle of nowhere or anything, but there are these thick woods that surround the neighborhood. They always felt kind of creepy to me, especially on overcast days like that one was. I was bored, just hanging out in the front yard watching Tommy Benson, this 9-year-old kid from down the street, doing these lame tricks on his bike in the cul-de-sac. He kept trying to pop wheelies, but could only get the front wheel like 2 inches off the ground. I was mostly just killing time until dinner, not really paying attention to anything else. That's when it happened. About 200 feet down the road, I noticed something moving. At first, I thought it was Mr. Wilson from 3 houses down. He's this big guy who always wears brown, so for a split second, my brain just went, oh, it's him. But then this thing stepped fully onto the road from between 2 houses, and I froze. This wasn't Mr. Wilson. This wasn't anybody from the neighborhood. This thing was walking on 2 legs, but it definitely wasn't a person. It was covered in hair. Not fur, really, but more like hair. The color was this reddish-brown, like a chestnut horse. I used to take riding lessons before we moved here, so that's the first comparison that popped into my head. The hair looked silky, not matted or gross, and it was maybe 5 inches long all over its body. It was tall, probably around 6 feet, but what really stuck out was how wide it was. Its shoulders were massive, like twice as broad as my dad's, and he works construction. The build was just wrong. Too husky, too powerful looking to be human. I wanted to call out to Tommy to look, but my voice wouldn't work. I was completely frozen, just staring. The creature was walking across the street when a car came around the bend. The thing and the car almost collided. It must have been within 3 feet of the bumper when the driver slammed on the brakes. I heard the tires squeal and everything. The weirdest part was how the creature reacted. It stopped and turned toward the car, just staring at it. I couldn't see its face clearly from where I was standing, but I could tell it was looking right at the driver. The car just sat there for maybe 5 seconds, which felt like forever, and then suddenly sped off, like the driver just panicked and hit the gas. After the car drove away, the creature turned around completely. That's when I noticed something super strange about how it moved. Its arms didn't swing when it walked like a person's would. They just hung at its sides, kind of stiff, and after taking a couple of steps, it started moving faster, but not in a normal way. Its gait was heavy and clumsy looking, like it should have been slow, but somehow it was moving faster than a person normally walks. It was like it was gliding almost, despite its bulky appearance. I noticed it didn't really have a neck. Its head just kind of sat on those massive shoulders. And I didn't see any ears sticking out from its hair. Its legs looked stiff when it walked too, not bent like how gorillas move in those nature documentaries. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute. The creature just turned around and walked back between the houses where it had come from, disappearing into the woods behind our development. By the time I got my voice back, it was gone. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unlock the front door. I ran inside, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. My mum was in the kitchen, and the second she turned around, she dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. "Judy, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet," she said, rushing over to me. I couldn't even get the words out at first. I saw there was a monster outside," I finally stammered. I think she thought I was making it up at first or exaggerating about seeing a bear or something. But when I started describing exactly what I saw, the chestnut hair, the stiff walk, the massive shoulders, she sat me down at the kitchen table and called my dad in from the garage. They both listened as I told them everything. I was talking a mile a minute, my words tumbling over each other. I kept insisting it wasn't a man in a costume. The way it moved was just wrong. Too fluid for how awkward it looked, and nobody in our neighborhood would dress up like that just to scare people. What would be the point? "It was a Bigfoot," I finally said. "I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it was." My parents exchanged this look I couldn't quite read. My dad sat down across from me and took my hands, which were still trembling. "Judy, you know we've always said you're the most honest kid we know," he said carefully. "You've never been one to make up stories or exaggerate. If you say you saw something, I believe you saw something." I burst into tears then, not because I was scared anymore, but because they weren't dismissing me. They were actually listening. My mum called the police, but when they finally showed up an hour later, they barely took any notes. The officer kept asking if maybe I'd seen a bear walking on its hind legs, or if someone could have been wearing a costume. He seemed bored, like he was just going through the motions. I could tell he thought I was just a kid with an overactive imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing staring at the car, perfectly still, except for its hair moving slightly in the breeze. I kept thinking about the driver. Who were they? Why did they speed off like that? Did they see what I saw? I wondered if they told anyone, or if they were too afraid people would think they were crazy. The next morning, my dad went to talk to some of the neighbors. When he came back, his expression was different, more concerned. Apparently, we weren't the only ones who had noticed strange things happening around the neighborhood lately. Mrs. Abernathy, the older lady who lives at the end of our street, said she'd been hearing weird noises coming from the woods for the past week. Not animal sounds she recognized, but this bizarre howling that would start high-pitched and then drop lower. Like a man howling, she said. She'd lived here for 30 years and never heard anything like it before. The Petersons, who lived closest to where I saw the creature disappear, said they'd been smelling this awful odor near their backyard for days. like a mix between a skunk, rotten eggs, and wet dog. They thought maybe an animal had died in the woods, but they couldn't find anything when they looked. The strangest thing came from Mr. Gonzalez, who takes his dog for a walk through the development every morning at dawn. He said he'd found these weird footprints at the edge of the woods 3 days earlier. They only had 3 toes and were huge, much bigger than a human foot. He took pictures on his phone and showed them to my dad. That's when things started getting really weird. Word spread through the neighborhood about what I'd seen, and suddenly everyone was talking about Bigfoot. Some local news reporter even showed up at our door asking for an interview. My parents turned them away, saying I was too shaken up to talk about it. Then this guy showed up saying he was a cryptozoological investigator or something like that. He wore this vest with too many pockets and had all these fancy recording devices. My parents let him talk to me, but they stayed in the room the whole time. He asked me a million questions about what the creature looked like, how it moved, which direction it went. He recorded everything I said and took notes on this little pad. The investigator guy, Mr. Bennett, showed me pictures of different alleged Bigfoot sightings and asked if what I saw looked similar. Some of them did, especially this one picture from Pennsylvania that showed a creature with the same chestnut-colored hair. He told us there had been other sightings in the forests around Greensburg over the years, and he had a theory that there were several of these creatures that move between established territories following food sources. For a few days, our quiet little neighborhood was buzzing with activity. People kept coming to our house asking questions, and kids at school started calling me Bigfoot Girl. Some believed me, but most just thought it was hilarious. I started wishing I'd never told anyone what I'd seen. About a week after the sighting, I was sitting on our back porch doing homework when I heard it. That exact howl Mrs. Abernathy had described. It started on a high note and then dropped lower, echoing through the trees. My pencil snapped in my hand, and I ran inside so fast I knocked over my chair. My mum found me hiding in my bedroom closet, hyperventilating. When I told her what I'd heard, she called my dad, who was still at work. He came home early, and they spent the evening reassuring me that whatever was out there couldn't get to me in the house. I wasn't so sure. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the creatures out there in the woods, watching our neighborhood, maybe even watching me specifically. I kept wondering if the one I saw knew I had spotted it. The thought made my skin crawl. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a weird smell coming through my open window. It was exactly how the Petersons had described it, like skunk mixed with rotten eggs and wet dog. I was too terrified to get up and close the window. I just lay there, pulling my covers over my nose, straining to hear any sounds outside. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves in our backyard. Slow, deliberate steps moving around the perimeter of our property. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I was afraid that if I made any noise, whatever was out there would hear me. So I just lay there, rigid with fear, listening as the footsteps circled our house and eventually faded away. I didn't tell my parents about that night. I didn't want them to worry more than they already were. But I started keeping my window closed and locked, even on hot nights. The sightings and strange occurrences around our neighborhood continued for about a month. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. No more footprints, no more smells, no more howling. The investigator guy said the creatures had probably moved on to another area following seasonal food sources. Life slowly went back to normal. People stopped talking about Bigfoot, and eventually the kids at school found something else to gossip about. But I never forgot what I saw. How could I? Sometimes I still have nightmares about it, that massive silhouette against the grey sky, the way it turned to look at the car, how unnaturally it moved. In my dreams, though, instead of walking away, it turns and spots me watching it. Then it starts walking toward me, arms stiff at its sides, moving faster than it should be able to. I've spent hours online reading about other Bigfoot sightings, looking for similarities to what I experienced. Some of the stories match mine exactly: the three-toed footprints, the distinctive howl, the awful smell. It makes me feel less alone, knowing other people have seen these things too. I still don't know what exactly I saw that day. Was it really Sasquatch, some undiscovered species, or something else entirely? All I know is that it was real, and it changed the way I look at those woods behind our house. They're not just trees anymore, they're hiding places full of secrets and things science can't explain. Every now and then, when I'm alone in the yard and the light is fading, I get the feeling of being watched. I'll look toward the tree line and wonder if it's out there, observing our neighborhood, learning our routines. I wonder if the creature I saw that day remembers me too. The little girl who stood frozen in her front yard, the only human who saw it clearly in broad daylight. Whatever it was, I know what I saw, and I know it's still out there somewhere. Story 13. Tut. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I've always been the skeptical one in my friend group, the one who looks for logical explanations. But what happened to us at Bear Creek Campground in Armstrong County this past March, I still can't explain it. I've tried. God knows I've tried. It was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip. Just me, Jordan, Tyler, Mackenzie and Riley taking advantage of the first decent weekend weather after a brutal Pennsylvania winter. We'd been planning it for weeks, just a chance to disconnect, hike some trails, and maybe drink a few beers around the campfire. Nothing crazy. We arrived Friday afternoon and set up our 2 cabins without any issues. The campground was pretty empty. It was still early in the season, and the forecast had mentioned possible rain, but we didn't care. It felt good just to be outside after being cooped up all winter. Saturday morning was gorgeous. We made breakfast, mapped out a short hiking trail, and spent the morning exploring. Everything was totally normal. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. Just the sounds of birds, the crunch of leaves under our boots, and the occasional laugh from Riley, who kept trying to spot wildlife. After lunch, we split up for a bit. Tyler and I needed to refill our water jugs at the pump station about 50 yards from our cabins, while Mackenzie and Riley stayed behind to organize our gear for the night. I remember checking my watch. It was around 2:30 p.m. The pump was one of those old-fashioned hand pumps that takes forever to fill anything. Tyler was pumping while I held the jugs. We were just talking about normal stuff, work, some new Netflix show, when Tyler suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His face went completely blank. "Dude, what's wrong?" I asked, following his gaze toward the tree line behind me. I'll never forget the feeling that washed over me when I turned around. About 70 yards away, something was emerging from the dense pine trees. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as a person, maybe another camper. But within seconds, I knew that whatever I was looking at wasn't human. It was tall, easily 6.5 feet, maybe more. The entire body was covered in dark, matted hair. Not fur exactly, but longer, stringier hair. What struck me most was its proportions. It had these impossibly broad shoulders that tapered down to narrower hips. The head was weird too. Kind of peaked at the top, not round like a human's. "What the fuck is that?" Tyler whispered, his voice cracking. The thing was walking upright, completely bipedal, with a slow, deliberate gait. Each step was heavy, purposeful. It wasn't rushing, but it was definitely moving toward us. I dropped the water jug. Neither of us said a word. We just ran. I've never felt adrenaline like that before. My entire body was electric with fear. We sprinted back toward the cabins, yelling for Mackenzie and Riley. They must have heard the panic in our voices, because they were already outside when we got there. Riley looked confused, Mackenzie alarmed. "Get inside! There's something out there!" Tyler shouted, pointing back toward the pump. We all huddled by the cabin window, peering out. The creature had changed direction and was now moving along the perimeter of the campground. It wasn't running, just methodically walking as if patrolling. We could see it clearly now, moving between trees, occasionally stopping to look around. "Is that a fucking bear?" Mackenzie whispered, her voice shaking. "Bears don't walk like that," I said. My mouth was so dry I could barely get the words out. "Not for that long, not that human-like." Riley, who'd been silent until now, suddenly grabbed my arm. "It's coming closer." The thing had changed direction again and was now approaching our side of the campground. It moved with this strange confidence, like it knew exactly where it was going. It came within maybe 30 feet of our cabin, close enough that I could see the hair on its body moving slightly in the breeze, close enough to see that its face wasn't quite right. Not a bear, not a man, something else entirely. For a brief moment I swear it looked directly at our window. My heart stopped. There was intelligence in that look, awareness. Then it turned and walked back toward the forest, disappearing into the trees as casually as it had appeared. No one moved for at least 5 minutes. We just stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space where it had been. "Did everyone else see that?" Tyler finally asked, his voice barely audible. We all nodded. "What the hell was it?" Riley asked. I think it might have been a Sasquatch," I said, immediately feeling stupid for even saying it out loud. "Bigfoot isn't real," Mackenzie snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then what the hell did we just see?" Tyler demanded. We argued about it for a while, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a bear walking on its hind legs. But bears don't walk upright for that long, and the proportions were all wrong. A person in a suit. But we were miles from anywhere, and who would go to that trouble? Plus, the movement was too natural, too fluid for a costume. As the initial shock wore off, fear set in. What if it came back? What if it tried to get into our cabins? The doors had basic locks, but nothing that would stop something that size if it really wanted to get in. Tyler, always the practical one, grabbed some metal coat hangers from the cabin closet. He bent them over the doorknobs as an extra security measure. It was primitive, but it made us feel slightly better. Riley called the local ranger station, but it went to voicemail. Of course, it was Saturday afternoon. We eventually got through to the local sheriff's office. The deputy who answered sounded skeptical, but said he'd send someone out to check. 2 hours later, a deputy named Collins arrived. He listened to our story, took some notes, and walked around the perimeter of the camp. He found nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. "Probably just a bear," he said, not even trying to hide his disbelief. "They're coming out of hibernation this time of year. If you see it again, make lots of noise and it'll run off." But I knew it wasn't a bear, we all did. After the deputy left, we debated whether to pack up and leave. It was getting dark, and the thought of driving those winding mountain roads at night wasn't appealing. Plus, there was a stubborn part of me that wanted to understand what we'd seen. So we decided to stay, but agreed to sleep in the same cabin and take turns keeping watch. Before it got completely dark, we decided to check around the campsite ourselves. We grabbed flashlights and stayed close together, searching the area where we'd seen the creature disappear into the trees. We didn't go deep into the forest. None of us were that brave. But we examined the edge of the tree line. That's when we noticed the smell. It's hard to describe, kind of like a chemical odor, similar to sulfur but mixed with something musky and organic. It was strongest near the spot where the creature had entered the forest. None of us had noticed it earlier. We'd been too terrified, but now it was unmistakable. "Do bears smell like that?" Riley asked, covering her nose. "No," Tyler said firmly. "Nothing smells like that." We retreated to the cabin as darkness fell. No one had much of an appetite, but we forced ourselves to eat some granola bars and chips. We tried to distract ourselves by playing cards, but every snapping twig or rustling leaf outside made us freeze. Around midnight, Mackenzie, who was taking the first watch, suddenly sat up straight. "Listen," she whispered. We all went silent. At first, I didn't hear anything but the usual forest sounds. Then I caught it. Heavy footsteps moving slowly around the campsite. The distinct sound of something large walking bipedally. We killed all the lights and huddled in the center of the cabin, away from the windows. The footsteps circled the cabin twice, sometimes stopping for several seconds before continuing. None of us dared to look outside. I've never felt fear like that, the pure, primal terror of being hunted. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the footsteps receded. We sat in the dark until dawn, nobody sleeping, barely speaking. When the first light finally broke through the windows, we packed our stuff in record time and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, we tried to process what had happened. Tyler was convinced it was a Sasquatch. He'd been interested in cryptozoology as a kid and said our experience matched countless other Bigfoot sightings in the Appalachian region. Riley wasn't sure, suggesting it could have been local kids playing a prank, though she couldn't explain how they would have manufactured that smell or mimicked those footsteps. Mackenzie was the most skeptical, insisting there had to be a logical explanation, though she couldn't provide one. I still don't know what to believe. I've spent hours researching, looking for similar accounts from Bear Creek or the surrounding areas. I found a few vague stories about strange sightings in Armstrong County over the years, but nothing as detailed as what we experienced. The four of us have talked about it countless times in the months since, analyzing every detail we can remember. We've never told many people who would believe us, but sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still see it walking with that eerily deliberate gait, still smell that strange sulfuric odor. I haven't been camping since. I'm not sure I ever will again. Whatever we saw that day at Bear Creek wasn't something that should exist in our world. It wasn't something that fits into the neat categories of animals we're taught about. It was something else, something that shouldn't be there. The worst part isn't the fear or the confusion. It's the certainty that it knew exactly what it was doing, that it was aware of us watching it, that it was sending us a message. This is my territory, not yours. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, patrolling the perimeter of Bear Creek Campground, waiting for the next group of campers to arrive. I still jump at unexpected sounds outside my apartment. I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I hear those heavy, deliberate footsteps circling my building. And I still can't shake the feeling that someday I'll look out my window and see that tall, hair-covered figure staring back at me, reminding me that I was never supposed to see it in the first place. Story 14. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks. My hands are literally shaking as I type this. What happened to me and my family in Collinsville this September still doesn't feel real, but I know what I saw. I know what I experienced, and I'm not crazy. I've lived in Collinsville, Ohio my whole life. It's a small place where everyone knows everyone. I'm just an average guy, work at the manufacturing plant on Route 12, married to my high school sweetheart Kelly, with our 6-year-old daughter Emma. We've got a modest house with a garden out back that I'm pretty proud of, 2 cats, Whiskers and Mittens, and our old lab Tucker. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary, until this September when everything changed. It started with the lights in the sky. My neighbor Dale and I were having beers on my back deck around 10 p.m., just shooting the breeze after a long work week. Dale noticed them first, 2 bright objects hovering way up there, like stars, but definitely not stars. They were too bright, too deliberate in their movements. "Marcus, you seeing that?" Dale asked, pointing upward. At first, I thought they were just planes or satellites, but they weren't moving like either. They just hung there, switching colors from red to white, then back again. We watched for maybe 15 minutes, completely transfixed. Then, without warning, one of them just shot across the sky westward. I don't mean it moved fast. I mean it vanished in a streak of light. One second it was there, the next it was just a fading trail across the night sky. What the actual hell was that? Dale whispered. I didn't have an answer. The other light stayed put for another minute or two, then slowly faded out. We talked about it for a while, making the usual jokes about aliens and government experiments, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. That was just the beginning. 3 nights later, Kelly and I woke up to Emma screaming bloody murder. Not just crying, screaming, the kind that makes your heart stop. We rushed to her room and found her sitting bolt upright in bed, pointing at her window, the one that faces our backyard and garden. "There's someone outside!" she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "There's a monster looking at me!" Kelly held her while I checked the window. Nothing there. I even went outside with a flashlight and walked the whole perimeter of our property. Nothing seemed disturbed, no footprints, no broken branches. But Tucker was acting strange, whining and pacing, refusing to go near the back of the yard. I chalked it up to a nightmare, and we eventually got Emma back to sleep between us in our bed. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same window, always around 3 a.m. Emma started refusing to sleep in her own room. Our cats were acting weird, too. Whiskers kept hissing at nothing, and Mittens had taken to hiding under the couch for hours at a time. Then I started noticing things in my garden. At first, it was just a couple of tomato plants knocked over. I figured it was raccoons, or maybe the neighbor's dog got loose. But then my entire row of corn was trampled. Not eaten, just knocked down and broken. Whatever did it was big and didn't seem interested in the food itself. That's when I found the footprint. It was about 10 feet from Emma's window, partially hidden in the mulch of my flower bed. At first glance I thought someone had dropped a welcome mat or something. It was that big, but when I looked closer, I could make out 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, like whatever made it was heavy. I'm 6'2" and wear a size 12 shoe, and this print was almost twice the size of my foot. I took pictures with my phone, but they didn't capture the depth, the realness of it. I tried to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe some teenagers with one of those fake Bigfoot feet you can buy online, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever made that print was real, and it had been outside my daughter's window. Around this same time, we started hearing the sounds. It's hard to describe. Sort of like a baby crying, but wrong. Deeper, with this weird fluctuation that made my skin crawl. The first time we heard it, Kelly thought it was Emma having another nightmare. But when we checked, she was sound asleep. The sound was coming from somewhere in the woods behind our property. Whenever that sound started, everything else went silent. No crickets, no frogs, nothing. Even the wind seemed to stop. Tucker would whimper and hide under our bed. The cats would freeze, fur standing on end. It would last for maybe 5 minutes, then stop as suddenly as it had started. I didn't tell Kelly or anyone else at first, but I knew what was happening. I knew because I'd seen it before, back in August. I just couldn't bring myself to admit it, even to myself. It happened at Willowbrook Pond, about 3 miles from our house. I go fishing there sometimes after work. Nothing serious, just a way to unwind. That day in mid-August, I'd found a nice spot on a fallen log near the water's edge. It was early evening, maybe 7 p.m., still plenty of light, but the sun was getting lower. I remember being completely zoned out, just watching my line in the water, when I heard movement in the woods behind me. Not the normal rustling of squirrels or birds. This was heavier, deliberate, breaking branches, soft thuds of something large moving through the underbrush. I turned to look over my shoulder, expecting to see a deer maybe, or someone else coming to fish. What happened next is something I'll never forget as long as I live. I was so startled I actually fell backward off the log, dropping my rod in the shallow water. Standing there, about 45 yards away at the edge of the trees, was something I still struggle to find words for. It was a creature standing upright like a man, but massive, almost 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark hair or fur, but around its head and face, the hair was a smoky grey colour, lighter around what I could make out as a face. Its eyes are what I remember most vividly. Large, dark, and deeply set. They weren't animal eyes, but they weren't human either. They had an intelligence to them that made my blood run cold. It wasn't blinking as it stared at me. The arms were impossibly long, hanging past its knees, ending in hands that seemed too large even for its massive frame. Its feet were huge and covered in the same dark hair. Its chest was broad and powerful. We just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think clearly. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. It might have been seconds or minutes. I honestly don't know. There was a smell, too, this musty, earthy odour that wasn't exactly unpleasant, but definitely wasn't normal for the woods. Sort of like wet fur mixed with something I can't quite place. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it turned its massive body, parted some branches with those long arms, and just walked into the woods. No rushing, no dramatic exit. It just left. I sat there on the ground, soaking wet from falling partially in the pond for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I didn't tell anyone, not Kelly, not my friends, no one. Who would believe me? Hell, I barely believed it myself. But there was something else about the encounter that I've never been able to explain. When we were looking at each other, I felt this presence in my mind. A warmth spreading across my forehead and behind my eyes. A pressure, but not painful, more like the feeling of someone standing very close behind you, though there was no one there. I got the distinct impression it was trying to communicate with me, not with words, but with feelings, images. I can't really explain it. But I felt understood in a way I've never experienced before or since. After that day at the pond, I started noticing things around town I'd never paid attention to before. Old stories people told about strange sightings in the woods, missing pet reports that never got resolved, the areas of forest outside of Collinsville that locals just naturally avoided without really knowing why. So when the lights appeared in September, when Emma started screaming about the monster at her window, when I found that massive footprint in my garden, I knew what was out there, and I knew it had found my home. The night everything came to a head was a Wednesday. Kelly had taken Emma to her mother's for the night. Emma had been so traumatized by the nightmares that we thought a change of scenery might help. I stayed home with Tucker, planning to use my time alone to fix some things around the house. Around dusk, Tucker started acting agitated. Pacing, whining, scratching at the back door. I figured he needed to go out, so I let him into the backyard. He immediately ran to the edge of our property, barking frantically at the tree line. Then I heard it. That same baby crying sound, but closer than ever before. Tucker's barking stopped immediately, and he tucked his tail and ran back to the house, pushing past me to get inside. Something compelled me to walk toward the trees. It was like my body was moving on its own. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to go back inside, lock the doors, call someone, anyone. But I kept walking. At the edge of my property, right where our mowed lawn meets the wild growth of the woods, I stopped. The sun had nearly set, but there was still enough light to see maybe 20 yards into the trees. Movement caught my eye. Not random forest movement, but deliberate shifting of something large. And then I saw it again. The same creature from the pond, but this time it was moving toward me. It stopped about 10 yards away, half hidden by a large oak tree. I could see its massive frame, its long arms, those eyes reflecting what little light remained. We stood there, staring at each other across the boundary between my world and its world. That same pressure built in my head again, stronger this time. A warmth that spread from my forehead to the base of my skull. Images flashed through my mind. The night sky, The lights Dale and I had seen, deep forests I didn't recognize, faces that weren't quite human but weren't animal either. I don't know how long we stood there. My phone was buzzing in my pocket, probably Kelly checking in, but I couldn't break the connection to answer it. Finally, it raised one of those massive hands, not in a threatening way, but almost like a greeting, a farewell. Then it simply turned and moved deeper into the forest, its massive form somehow blending into the darkness despite its size. I stood there until I couldn't see anything anymore, until the woods were just a wall of black. The pressure in my head had gone, leaving behind a strange emptiness. When I finally turned to go back to the house, my legs were so weak I nearly fell. That was 3 weeks ago. Emma hasn't had any more nightmares. The cats are back to normal. Tucker no longer refuses to go to certain parts of the yard. The crying sound hasn't returned, but I know it's still out there. I feel it sometimes, especially at dusk, that same presence at the edges of my mind. I've started researching, discreetly asking questions around town. There are others who've seen things, who've had experiences they can't explain. Most won't talk about it openly, but in private, with enough reassurance, the stories come out. Whatever I encountered, whatever visited my home, looked in on my daughter, left that footprint in my garden. It wasn't just passing through, it was examining us, learning about us, and somehow I know it will be back. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Most days I can hardly believe it myself, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt, and nothing will ever convince me it wasn't real. The world around Collinsville isn't what I thought it was. There are things in these woods, things that have probably been here long before us. Things that are watching, waiting, perhaps trying to understand us as much as we're trying to understand them. I keep a camera by my bedside now. I've installed motion sensor lights around the property. I'm ready next time, because I know there will be a next time, and maybe then I'll get some answers. Story 15. I still don't sleep well, even though it's been almost 3 months since it happened. Every little sound outside our house jerks me awake, and I find myself staring out the window into the darkness, wondering if it's back. My husband Douglas says I'm being paranoid, but I notice he doesn't turn off the new security lights when he comes to bed anymore. And our dog Rusty? He's never been the same since that night. We've lived in our place in Mercer County for almost 7 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a modest 2-story house on about 5 acres, most of it wooded at the back. We always loved the privacy, the quiet, never thought that isolation would become something frightening. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. I remember because Douglas had gotten home from work early for once, and we'd just finished dinner. The dishes were still in the sink when Rusty started acting weird. He's usually pretty chill, a 6-year-old German Shepherd mix who's content to lie at our feet while we watch TV. But around 7:15, he suddenly jumped up and started pacing, going from the living room to the kitchen, then to the front door, then back again. "What's up with him?" Douglas asked, looking up from his phone. I shrugged. Maybe he needs to go out. But when I opened the back door, Rusty just stood there, hackles raised, staring into the yard. He wouldn't go out. Instead, he backed up, started growling deep in his throat. I've never heard him make that sound before, not even when the meter reader came unannounced last summer, and Rusty nearly had a fit. I closed the door, and Rusty immediately ran to the front of the house, scratching at that door instead, then back to the kitchen door, back and forth, whining and growling. "Something's wrong with him," I said to Douglas. "I think there might be something outside." Douglas sighed and got up, grabbing the flashlight we keep by the back door. "Probably just a raccoon or something. Come on, boy." Rusty hesitated, then followed Douglas outside. I stayed at the window, watching as they moved across the yard. The sun had set, but there was still some light in the sky, that greyish-blue twilight that makes everything look a little off. I could see Douglas sweeping the flashlight beam across the yard as Rusty moved ahead of him, nose to the ground. The way Rusty was moving made me nervous. He wasn't running around happily or peeing on things like he usually does. He was tracking something, moving in a direct line from our back porch across the yard toward the tree line about 100 yards away. Douglas followed him, flashlight beam bobbing in the growing darkness. I lost sight of them when they got closer to the woods, so I moved to the kitchen window that faces that direction. I could just make out the flashlight beam moving along the edge of the trees. They stayed there for maybe 5 minutes, long enough that I was starting to get worried. Then something happened. I saw Rusty suddenly bolt forward into the trees, disappearing completely. Douglas's flashlight beam jerked in that direction, and even from inside the house, I could hear Douglas yelling for Rusty to come back. And then I heard it, this crashing sound, like something big moving through the underbrush, really big. Not a deer or even a bear. This was louder, heavier. I could hear branches snapping, not just twigs, but actual branches, and a sound like heavy footfalls. It was moving fast, whatever it was, away from where Douglas and Rusty were. I ran to the back door and opened it. "Douglas?" I called out, not wanting to shout too loud with something unknown out there. "I'm coming back," he called. I could see the flashlight moving toward the house now. A minute later, Douglas came jogging up with Rusty right behind him. He looked pale. "Did you hear that?" he asked as soon as he was inside. He locked the door behind him, something we rarely do out here. "The crashing? Yeah. What was it?" Douglas shook his head. "I don't know. I couldn't see anything. But whatever it was big. Really big." Rusty was still on edge, pacing again, going to the windows and staring out. "He chased after something," Douglas explained, catching his breath. "I was following him along the tree line, and he was really focused on something. Then all of a sudden he just took off into the woods. That's when I heard it moving. Something big, crashing through the trees. It was moving away fast." I felt a chill run up my spine. "A bear?" We'd had black bears in the area before, though they usually kept their distance. "I don't think so. Bears don't move like that. This was..." He struggled to find the words. "I don't know. Different." Rusty was back at the door again, whining to go out. Against my better judgment, we decided to let him out again. But this time we both went with him. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight too. The moment we stepped outside, Rusty took off again, but not toward the woods this time. He ran to an area about 20 yards from our house, near the garden shed, and started circling and sniffing intensely. "He found something," Douglas said, moving closer with the flashlight. When we reached the spot, Douglas shone his light down at the ground, and we both froze. There in the soft soil near the shed were footprints, but not animal prints, at least not like any animal I'd ever seen, and definitely not human either. The prints were huge. Douglas crouched down next to one and placed his hand beside it. The print was at least twice the size of his hand, about 11 inches long and maybe 5.5 inches across at the widest part. They clearly showed 5 toes, almost like a human foot, but much, much bigger, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. "What the hell made this?" I whispered, my voice shaking. Douglas didn't answer, just moved the flashlight beam to follow the tracks. There were several of them, leading from near our back porch to where we were standing. Then they turned slightly and headed straight for the woods. The distance between them was enormous, at least 4 feet from heel to toe of the next print. Whatever made them had a stride twice as long as a tall human. "This isn't right," Douglas mumbled. He stood up and shone his light toward the woods again. "This isn't right at all." I felt exposed, standing there in our yard, with darkness all around us and those massive tracks leading into the trees. "We should go inside," I said, tugging at Douglas's arm. "We should call someone." He nodded, and we quickly headed back to the house, practically dragging Rusty, who wanted to keep following the trail. Once inside, we locked all the doors and pulled the curtains closed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the phone. I called the local police, trying to sound calm as I explained what we'd found. To their credit, they didn't laugh or dismiss us. They said they'd send someone out. While we waited, Douglas and I barely spoke. We just sat in the living room, Rusty at our feet, still alert and occasionally growling softly at nothing we could see. I kept thinking about those footprints. Too big for a human, too human-like for an animal. I'd lived in Pennsylvania my whole life and had never seen anything like them. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. They were professional, but I could tell they expected to find deer tracks or maybe bear prints. Something normal, explainable. We led them to the footprints, which were even clearer now that it was fully dark and the flashlights created sharper shadows in the depressions. The senior officer, a guy named Brennan, who looked to be in his 50s, crouched down just like Douglas had done. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just examined the prints carefully. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Douglas asked him. Officer Brennan stood up slowly. "Can't say that I have." He was trying to sound casual, but I could see the concern in his face. "Mind if we follow these a bit?" We stayed near the house while the 2 officers followed the tracks to the woods. They were gone for about 15 minutes, and when they came back, they were talking quietly to each other. "We found where it went into the forest," Officer Brennan told us. "Whatever it was, it made quite a path. Knocked down brush, broke branches, some of them pretty high up." "How high?" Douglas asked. 8, maybe 9 feet off the ground." I felt my stomach drop. What could be that tall? Officer Brennan shook his head. "I don't know, ma'am. I'm going to contact the Pennsylvania Game Commission. They might have some ideas. Maybe it's a bear that's walking funny because it's injured. Hard to say." But his tone made it clear he didn't believe that explanation any more than we did. The officers took pictures of the footprints and made some notes. Before they left, Officer Brennan said, "Might be a good idea to keep your doors locked for a while. Maybe get some extra lighting for your yard." "You think it's dangerous?" I asked. "I think anything that size is best treated with caution," he replied carefully. "We'll have patrols check your road more frequently for the next few days, just to be safe." After they left, Douglas and I stayed up late, too wired to sleep. We kept Rusty inside, though he was constantly going to the windows, especially the ones facing the woods. "What do you think it was?" I asked Douglas as we sat at the kitchen table, both of us on our 3rd cup of tea. He stared into his mug for a long moment. "I don't want to sound crazy," he said finally, "but those look like Bigfoot prints. Under normal circumstances, I might have laughed. Douglas and I weren't the type to believe in cryptids or monsters or any of that stuff. But after seeing those prints, after hearing whatever it was crashing through the woods, I couldn't laugh." "You think the Game Commission will know what it is?" I asked instead. "Maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. We found out the next day that the police had indeed contacted both the Game Commission and another agency they wouldn't name. Someone from the Game Commission came out while Douglas was at work and examined the tracks, which were still visible, though a bit degraded from overnight dew. They took more pictures and measurements, but when I asked what could have made them, the agent just shook his head. "Not any animal we typically document in this region," was all he would say. That weekend, Douglas installed motion-activated security lights all around our property, bright ones that would flood the yard with light if anything larger than a squirrel moved out there. He also bought a game camera and set it up facing the tree line. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew why. We wanted proof if it came back. For weeks afterward, Rusty remained on high alert, especially in the evenings around the same time we'd had our encounter. He'd growl at the windows, his ears perked forward, listening for something we couldn't hear. Sometimes he'd wake us in the middle of the night, standing at our bedroom window and making that same deep growl he'd made that first night. The security lights triggered a few times, mostly from deer or raccoons. The game camera caught the usual woodland creatures, but nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Sometimes, when I was alone in the house during the day, I'd catch movement at the edge of the woods from the corner of my eye. But when I'd look directly, nothing would be there. About a month after the incident, Douglas was out of town for work, and I was home alone with Rusty. It was around 10 p.m., and I was getting ready for bed, when all the security lights suddenly came on at once. Rusty went ballistic, barking, growling, running from window to window. I grabbed my phone ready to call 911 and peered cautiously through the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything. The yard was empty, brightly lit by the security lights. But then, I noticed Rusty was focused on one specific area, the far corner where our property meets the woods. I stared hard at that spot, and for just a moment I thought I saw something, a dark shape, taller than the surrounding trees, just at the edge of the light's reach. It moved slightly, shifting position, and then it was gone, melting back into the darkness of the forest. The security lights stayed on for almost 5 minutes before turning off, their motion sensors no longer triggered. Rusty continued to growl at the windows for hours afterward. I didn't sleep at all that night. When Douglas got home the next day, I told him what I'd seen. He checked the game camera, but it had captured nothing unusual. Just a few seconds of the lights coming on, and then nothing, as if whatever triggered them had somehow avoided being in the camera's field of view. We've had a few more incidents since then, security lights coming on for no apparent reason, Rusty acting strangely, strange noises from the woods at night. But we've never again found footprints like those first ones, and we've never gotten a clear look at whatever visits the edge of our property. The police eventually stopped checking on us regularly. The Game Commission filed some report that probably sits unread in a filing cabinet somewhere. Life has mostly returned to normal, except for the security lights that now surround our house like a fortress, and the way we no longer enjoy our backyard after dusk. Sometimes, when I can't sleep and I'm staring out at our dark yard, I wonder what really happened that night. What made those tracks? What was crashing through our woods? And most unsettling of all, why did it come so close to our house in the first place? Was it curious about us, the way we were curious about it, or was it something else that brought it to the edge of our yard, staring at our home from the shadows? I don't know if we'll ever get answers, but one thing's for certain, I'll never look at those woods behind our house the same way again. And whenever Rusty starts growling at the windows in the evening, I make sure all the doors are locked, the curtains are closed, and the security lights are working properly, because something is out there, something big, and I can't shake the feeling that someday it might decide to come closer than just the edge of the woods.